We are going to start. Welcome all. Good morning to everyone who's joining us. We are very happy to have you here for the seminar. The seminar's name is Challenges and Opportunities for Investment in the New Global Economical Setting. It's a pleasure to welcome you all. Today we would like to reflect and analyze on the challenges that we are facing as a country to continue promoting foreign investment. This is going to be a space for dialogue and reflection. We're hoping that it's at the highest level. It's being set up through a series of very interesting conversations and very urgent conversations given what we are facing nowadays. Foreign investment, as you know, has historically been a key tool for development. Not only because it's additions to capital, but also in contributions to innovation, employment, productive chains, and sustainability. In this global setting that's marked by deep economical transformations and all the technological and geopolitical changes as well, we know that it's key to look at how these changes are impacting investment decisions. This is an urgent issue, and also it's important to look at what opportunities are there for Chile. We'd like to greet and thank all the authorities, representatives on the public and private sectors, to all the international organizations, investors, strategic partners that are joining us. We're going to formally start, and I would like to invite you to listen to the welcoming remarks by the Director of InvestChile, Mrs. Carla Flores. Please, let's give her a hand. Welcome, Carla.
I know.
Good morning, everyone. First off, I would like to thank you for being here. This date is a complex date because it's a vacation period in this country, so we're very glad to see that a lot of people have responded. As you can see, we are following a seminar format, which we haven't done in a long time. The last time we did this was during the pandemic, and we had to do it online. And so we wouldn't miss this ecosystem for an investment. But since the last seminar that was done during the pandemic, we are in a very different world to the one that we were used to and knew back then. When we started planning this event many months ago, we were asked why to do an event of this characteristics in January after presidential elections. And to be honest, our understanding to talk about foreign investment is always relevant. But given today in the international context that we're facing, is a very urgent conversation as well. If there is something that foreign investors have always valued of Chile, is this state vision, this long-term vision, and the relevance that Chile has always given to foreign investment. And that vision hasn't changed with the political cycles, and that gives certitude to investors when they think on Chile as a place for locating their operations and investments. And, well, the international context that we're facing nowadays calls for reflection on how can we address the challenges that global investment flows are facing. We're not just talking about the conditions that Chile has for attracting foreign investment, but also all the key elements of international flows of investment. I believe it is time to talk about this, and we have a very interesting panel today with women who are leaders in different sectors, and that of course represent companies that operate in different parts of the world and that are also looking at to what is happening around the world. The world is not stopping, economical signals are always changing, and many of us are paying attention to the news around the world. And that's how this year starts, with a lot of movement, and we believe that it's important to meet and reflect on what's happening. We cannot forget that it's not only important to reflect on the moment, but also because of how important foreign investment is for our country. Foreign investment is not just being able to receive certain capital flows that are obviously important, but also it has to do with the contribution that it does to the productivity in different sectors. We can't also forget that foreign companies add more than 51% of the fiscal income of the country when we make the state work. And it's only 10% of these companies that generate 30% of formal employment, and that is 85% in export of services. That's how relevant foreign investment is to our country. And to close, 80% of investment projects that are being developed and implemented in the next 4 years come from international companies. That's how relevant foreign investment has as a relevant economical stakeholder, and that's why it's important to care for the condition that Chile has as a receptor for an investment. I wanted to share with you an image. Oh, there we go. Thank you. This shows the evolution of the portfolio of investment projects in Chile. These numbers not only show the arduous and professional work that all the people that work in our agency, but also shows the interest of international investors in our country. These are specific numbers. Last year, InvestChile aided 463 projects on an amount of $65 billion. This number implies a 17% growth compared to the previous year, and it's 32% more of what we received in 2022. And energy, mining, technology, infrastructure, either physical or digital, is at the head of these sectors. And another relevant is that these projects come from 44 different countries in the world. This is the beat of foreign investment in Chile. Many of these projects are going to materialize in the coming months and years. We're also very glad that more than 80% of this amount is regarding initiatives outside the metropolitan region. And this is something that we're trying to do, is take the benefits of economical growth to all the territories of the country. For these projects to materialize, for foreign investment to be an addition to the economical development of the country, we need to maintain and improve the conditions for investment, but also develop all the habilitating conditions to receive investment, starting with training of our talent, but also all the way to the digital and physical infrastructure, connectivity, make our permit obtention faster. These are all relevant issues. Also, we need to continue articulating private and public partnerships that will help us move forward in these issues. The role of this agency, as we know, we're a small agency, but our main role is to be an articulator between the public and private sector so we can move forward in projects that will benefit the country and its people. I always say that given my role, I have the possibility of meeting many investors and foreign business people, not only in Chile, but in different countries. And in each one of those meetings, they talk to me, they tell me about a country that has talent, availability, trustworthy, reliable, and with a very serious economical management, a country of possibilities, opportunities. And this brings your attention and shows that the country is a leader in the region. We've also spoken about our challenges, the gaps, where should we improve and how to move faster. And along with those conversations, companies are always offering their support into developing these subjects given their experience in their countries of origin. And many times in these conversations about regulation changes in industrial development, foreign companies contribute tremendously to this discussion. I would like to invite you that we as Chileans should be able to look at our country with those eyes, with the same eyes of the foreign investors. That we are aware of how it's important to care for our image that we've carefully built over decades, and also take on the same energy and enthusiasm that foreign investors have for coming to Chile to invest, not only to invest, but to also stay in this country. Let us value what we have and care for it and strengthen these characteristics and attractiveness that has made us leaders in the region. I thank you once more that you are joining us this morning, and let's keep on working together as we've done, and let's keep talking about foreign investment, development, and growth for our country. Thank you. Thank you very much to the director that's shared with us numbers that mean celebration, 17% growth, these 463 new projects, and also this continuous enthusiasm that we're hoping that we see the same enthusiasm in this gathering. We're going to keep on working to put our country still as a reliable investment destination as it was in 2025. Coming up, we have the honor of having the presence of one of the most important voices in the analysis of the economical panorama in Latin America. We're going to talk and reflect about two interesting questions. What do countries have to do, and the countries in the region do, to take advantage of the opportunities that are coming in this current context? And also, how does this regional scenario change given the geopolitical movements that are marking these agenda? So we're going to talk about this and a lot more, and we'd like to please give a round of applause to William Maloney, the chief economist of the World Bank for Latin America and the Caribbean, who's going to talk about this and also respond to these questions. So we would like to welcome you and listen to your presentation.
Muy buenos días a todos.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving me this space. Thank you for Carla and InvestChile for your invitation. We are living in different times. The international system is changing a lot in directions that we cannot clearly see. What I would like to do today is talk a little about some things of what we do know and what we don't know of how the international system is evolving, and also talk about what does Chile have to do to take advantage of the opportunities that we have, which are very clear to me, so we can keep growing. So I'm going to start by speaking about the state of the region. We developed a report a couple months ago precisely on this issue. We have the numbers that we currently need, and we also, there's a part specifically about entrepreneurship, but we're going to start asking ourselves, how are we doing as a region? And we've grown as a region less than any region in the world. We haven't done so well. We look at Chile. We are a little bit above the average in the region, but not that much. And it's not that with central bank has said 2.5, we say 2.2, but when we're talking about 2, we're talking about very low figures for creating new and better jobs and alleviating poverty in the country. So we have to look into why are we growing this fast and how within the new context can we actually grow. In the short term, we have some challenges. It's not a completely favorable global situation. Obviously, finally, interest rates are falling slowly by slowly in countries as we are finishing off inflation. There's a lot of uncertainty in what would the policies of the Fed be. Interest rates are falling slowly by slowly, and this reduces issues with debtors and all around the world, and growth in the G7 is going to continue low. China is a wild card. They're having issues with their growth model, and even though it's one of our most important markets, we don't know what's going to happen with growth in the midterm. There are many things they have to solve before going back to their previous growth rates, and the prices for copper's price is going on, but raw materials in the midterm. A market for raw materials, China is still going to be in low rates. But I don't want to talk about what's going to happen in 6 months and a year. I would like to locate the growth challenge in the long-term contest. Here's a book called Let's Recover the Lost Century of Growth. It's like, no, Maloney, that's not true. We haven't decreased what we have here is a graph of the income of countries related to the United States since 1860. And what we can see is Latin America was more or less the same in 1860, just like the rest of the countries, like Finland, like Sweden, like Spain, and there was a difference here. Those countries took off by the end of the 19th century, and we did not. And if you look at this orange line, that's us. It's flat, and there was a lost decade in the 80s. And as we know, there hasn't been growth in productivity of Chile for more than a decade. But what I want to say is that this question of why haven't we grown more at this moment, and coincidentally, it has to do with the same kind of question that the winners of the Nobel Prize have asked themselves, especially Peter Howat and Philippe Aghion, and Joe Mokyr as well. They've all asked themselves, why is growth higher in some places and less in others? Here we have a more detailed graph of the behavior of countries in Latin America, and we can see that there were many poor countries, talking about Colombia, Brazil, Ecuador, Jamaica, Mexico, but there was a kind of superstars, Uruguay, Argentina, above France and Germany, and Chile a little lower. It was not the superstar, but what we can see here is as France and Germany, they continue taking off, all the stars were actually going down in a decline. So we have to understand what happened. If we want to understand why we're not growing right now, we have to understand why weren't we able to take advantage of the opportunities at the time, to understand why, if we're going to have the capability of taking advantage of what's coming. Before going there, let's talk a bit about the international systems. There's a lot of volatility. The leader of the system is changing the rules every day. This can have impact on growth and on our opportunities. The fact is that Latin America has the same possibilities, and Chile with the same possibilities from a year ago. We have lots of energy, and we have lots of green energy, and that's important because Europeans are putting these CBAMs, carbon adjustment mechanism, that are going to punish producers of copper, for example, that are not using green energy. We have green energy in Chile. We have 53% of our energy matrix from renewable sources, and we have essential minerals, copper, lithium, and so on and so forth. So as I mentioned, we have these possibilities of manufacturing and other green products, and I believe that beyond this change on how the world is looking at power is going to benefit us, and we have to take advantage.
And this will continue happening regardless of what's happening internationally. And so when we see what's been happening in the region in terms of the tariffs in the last year, we see that it's not as much. There was a lot of noise when it comes to high tariffs in Latin America, but actually it's mostly for Europe and Asia. And while we see that in general in Mexico, for example, which supposedly was the country that was stealing the jobs from the American citizens, it was not a lot, and most imports are under the TLC, of course, the free trade agreement. So it's not been a big change. Now the thing is that the volatility has been taking off hugely, and first in 2018 that was Trump won, and that was increase in volatility, the lack of predictability of the huge system, and now this is 4 times the same number. So this is stopping the investment everywhere in the world. We see that in Mexico, their growth this year was pretty bad, but everyone else is quite okay. So we'll wait until this is all sorted out. So this volatility will hit us for quite a while, and we need to have the capacity as a country to be able to react to these changes, this volatility, which is something that truly could help us surf this moment. So what's really interesting here is that maybe because changes have not been as violent or as huge for Latin America, our exports have been quite strong. So we don't see a lot so far. And in terms of growth, Mexico is being benefited in a way, will benefit this, because while there's been an increase in the tariffs to China and their competitors, it's been more. So there's been a diversion in Mexico, and it's quite huge in Brazil. This figures come before negotiations between the U.S. and Brazil, so the impact will be much less than what we have here. And in Chile has lost 1.1% of the tariffs, so there's lots of uncertainty. And so the impact on Chile is pretty much zero in our model. And so in the short term, mid-term, we don't see a lot of it. Now the issue is that we don't know where this is going, and we need to be able to understand the motivations of those that are pushing the change. And this is quite difficult because we still see that here in our country, we don't really know what are or where change comes from. So on one hand, there's a doctrine that is making things worse. So that means that in the U.S., people feel like the world is, ripping apart. It's been ripping them off for many years. So it's a complex, more than economical complex. We need to see this is from 10 and 20, 30, 40 years, the U.S. has asked Europe to increase their military cases so that they can be in charge of the defense in Europe. And of course, conversation has gone nowhere. And so that's where the sense of, being ripped off against Europe, And this is what we see in a disruptive way. And in the economy, we, even before the free trade agreement with Mexico, the Grand Saccharin, Santos Rosperol said 30 years ago, all jobs were going to Mexico, but the biggest guilty has been China. And the World Trade Organization and everyone, will have something democratic and great. And so there's something in the U.S. now, and that means we need to create new jobs, and especially when it comes to manufacture, and this will continue happening. And, for Latin America, the part that is not Mexico, for the U.S., they don't care about what happens with us here, but for Mexico and Central America, it could be very severe depending on how the U.S. continues putting their strategy together. And the other logic is that we need to compete against China. So that means that we need to bring in new industries from China to this hemisphere, and that cannot happen in the U.S. And in a way, we see that in Mexico, in the sense that Mexico is benefiting from this process. But those things compete because, everyone is either ripping us off or, Latin America, there's manufacture, and there's certain parts of the international academia. And so I don't think the strategy is well articulated. So we are going to see, but what we do know is that there is a more steady system, and that midterm the U.S. is big, but only 15% of international commerce. As we know, Europeans and Latinos, we're all working together and in a new pact in the South Cone, and it's happening everywhere, where all countries want to be diversified, and then they want to have a system that can be foreseen. And so I don't think the system is dead, but it's a matter of years before we can tell exactly where we're landing. And I also think that there is some negotiation in a way between China and the U.S. in terms of what's their relation, and this is very hard to link, and we know that they are competing geopolitically, and so they are trying to find a new balance, and we don't know exactly where they will land, but something will come up as a new imbalance. And in the short term will have important costs. In the U.S. especially, there's a very interesting article by Nito Kopinet in the Financial Times. It came out a few days ago saying that, in Brexit, there was there wasn't a big impact in the first 2-3 years. And we left Europe and there was no impact. No. But now the calculation is that the UK lost about 6-8% of the GDP in terms of accumulated growth. And so that would be a problem. And so, of course, there's an important impact on global investment. Now, I don't know if this is affecting in the direct investment flow, but the direct foreign investment flow, but we see this everywhere. And we see how Latin America, except from the figures that Carlos showed, overall Latin America is under a process that we're not seeing the nearshoring impact. So it's quite flat, the foreign investment in Latin America. And so that could be due to several reasons. But, part of that is why there's uncertainty. But also as a region, we have different tasks. And so if we look at the education rates and the quality of the workforce, about 30-35% of companies in America, they say that they cannot grow because they lack qualified labor. So the figure is about 15%. So that's key because, if I'm going to open a company in Latin America, or if I'm thinking about living in China, I'm looking at Vietnam or Mexico. And then it's best if I go to Vietnam. And now if we look at infrastructure, if Chile has a good system, good infrastructure, the rest of Latin America, not so much. But especially Mexico, we see infrastructure that's quite old-fashioned. So once again, Vietnam is looking good. Chile is going under the same moment of violence that the rest of the continent is going through. Of course, it's much less. But in Mexico, the cost of operating in a system where organized crime has a lot of weight is increasing. And it's an issue that does not happen in Vietnam. So there are several areas where we need to work and make sure that we have a reputation in Chile. And we need to have financing, quality, and labor, all of that.
Y terminamos.
And that is it. Okay, now I would like to go back to this long-term issue and this loss cycle, and what does it mean for us looking towards the future. Well, one of the Nobel Prize winners, Peter Havel, has a model, and they have models where there are quite similar economies, and they could have different balance, growth equilibrium, high, low balance, depending on your capacity for absorbing new technologies from abroad. And now, if you have educated people and you have technological capacities, good management, you can have new opportunities and you can implement new technologies in Chile. And if not, then it's okay. And so this phenomenon with multiple balances, that also happens within very homogeneous products and very disaggregated products. So that started in 1870s. 1870s when Chile was a star, and we have 40% of international copper market now. But what we see, in the turn of the century, we dropped from 40% to the international market, and the production of copper also dropped to the point where Sofufa said, no more copper, this is not promoting growth. And of course, Sofufa was not correct, because as we were able to see later, around 1920s, copper took off again. So my point is, it's exactly the same product. It hasn't changed in 13.5 million years after, the Big Bang, or, So it's pretty much a homogeneous product, but two regimes in the same country, when the impact on the development of the country is quite different. And so what was the difference? Comparing new technologies coming up from the second industrial revolution. And so that was key. But the problem for us as a country was that it was brought by foreigners. That was the issue. These big companies. And, in 1960, there was no Chilean engineer that could monitor what was happening. And so, and this is why we feel this dependency. Of course, it should not happen like this. And this is another example, Japan. We'll talk about Japan like the big miracle. But no, the second most important exporter of copper now was Japan. And you know about three companies, for copper companies, Sumitomo, Hitachi, and Fujitsu. Companies that are huge, dynamic, and they have been diversified. Now, the question for us, looking towards the future, is why did this happen in Japan and not in Chile? And so where's our Hitachi? And this is also a matter of how we're managing new technologies. And I think that this is extremely important, looking into the future, looking at foreign investment. But the thing is, will we learn from it? Will we be able to use that to push economy in an active manner, the same way Chinese people do it? And, sometimes it's a way of learning. And so are we going to get to the technological frontier? Will we reach that balance of growth? We need to think about it that way. Because why couldn't we compete? Because, it was foreigners bringing new technologies the past century. I think it has to do with that, with the axis, the x-axis. We have engineers in the country that receive their education in the country for 100 people approximately per capita. And there's a delay in the adoption of technology in the vertical axis. So there is a strong relation here. We see all countries in Latin America. Oh, no, it's not working. Sorry. But they have very little engineers. In a country like Sweden or Denmark, they pretty much had the same level of income in Chile and Argentina in the 1900s, but 5 times for engineers. So it's 5 times the number of engineers. So countries in Latin America, they started with the second industrial revolution, and they had nothing that they could work with. So there's no way of identifying and adapting technologies in important sectors. So this is why we had to hire people from abroad. And so all of that lag, that could also explain the trajectory of growth that I just mentioned. But my point, because if you're thinking, industrial policies, the copper example, it says, it's not so much what's being produced, but the way that you are producing it. So if you're producing in a way where you're using technologies where the country has their own capacity for adopting these technologies and applying them in our industries or not. And so, how is also important, and how, if we look at the graph towards the right, we have a new survey called FAT, the Firm Adoption of Technology Survey. And I think it's a very good initiative from the World Bank, where in sectors that are very distant. We can measure the adoption rates of new relevant technologies in those sectors. So here we can see, on the left we have textile, and we also have, for example, we see that Korea is much lower than Poland. In Poland, we have Germans working in Poland, but what we see there is that Brazil and on the right, Chile, we're adopting technologies in a slower pace. So once again, we are delayed in adapting to new technologies in comparison to other regions. So we follow this pattern. And we see, then we don't have to increase education, right? This is wonderful. Vietnamese people, they have more education, etc. But we are increasing our levels of education, yes. But the graph is quite interesting. It's by Umeranos, a Chilean guy working with me, and all of these countries, they increased the human capital in terms of amount in an equal manner. So Chile is 90. About 2020, so we used the increase in education in Chile, and looking what happened with Korea when this happened, in Singapore as well. What we see is that all of these countries have more bang for buck. They have more of an impact than Chile, and both in productivity and growth. And so that means that our education may not be the same quality. Maybe we're doing something wrong, or we're not educating people in the right manner. So there's not a match between the economy and education, but there's certainly something, or maybe it's a matter of, if our companies are adapting technologies where they need these skills or education, and that's not showing up, so that could also be the problem.
I don't have the answer to this, but all these are important hypotheses. As I was saying, we keep on, I could say partially, education is not as good, but what we have here is the percentage of students that are above a certain line in terms of scorings in mathematics, for example. You see Vietnam, a poor country, is more or less the same level of the OCDE. Chile, compared to the rest of Latin America, is in a decent place, but still way beyond, under Vietnam and the rest of the OCDE. So we might be actually making progress in terms of education, but in terms of what our students know and are master, we're way below other regions. Also, when we look at numbers of, for example, of people graduating in tech and science careers, Latin America is still low. Our Nobel winners are in literature. We don't have Nobel Prizes in mathematics and physics. There's still a certain gap in how we are educating our people. In terms of the quality of our universities, everybody in this room went to excellent high schools. I know that. I was in Colombia. My daughter's high school was much better than in the United States. Latin Americans' elite is very well educated. But taking all universities together, we have very few in the top tier. Whereas in other areas, other regions, excepting Africa, is everybody else above us. I don't know exactly what is it that what is all the money that we're investing in education? What's happening? It's not generating many publications. We're not moving each other towards this technological border. We're not collaborating with the private sector. There's not something Latin America, and we have separations of universities and the private sector. We see that here. Actually, there's this separation, this gap. We don't see that in Finland and Norway, and we have to change that. One can also ask oneself, if this was so important in the last century, to have engineers to take advantage of this growth that we lost, why weren't there more engineers back then? Because there was no demand. And here comes the question. If our business people are prepared to surf the coming changes in the international scene, but also, are they ready to look at the opportunities that are here? For example, in Sina, or other historians, Aníbal Pinto, for example, they're going to say, listen, we're asking the same question a century ago. Why are basically foreigners coming here without knowing the language and all the social connections? Are these foreigners actually starting new industry? This question of, do we have the business capacity to look at the new opportunities, to leverage the foreign investment, is key here. So that was the question behind this last publication that we presented, and it's very, very, this question is key. Doing this study with Álvaro Garcia and the University of Los Andes, where we looked at how did Chilean companies react in front of the Chinese competition. And Agion, number 2 of my Nobels that I want to highlight today, he says, look, facing competition, if your company is close to the managing border, to the technological border, you can innovate and make space to work and still remain alive. But if you're away from those borders, you're going to die. That's also part of the reason why he got this Nobel Prize. So we made a contrast, Alvaro, myself, and many other countries with the UK, France. UK and France have more than 50% of their companies close to this border. And Chile was maybe around 7-10%. So it shows that our manufacturing sector was not capable of competing dynamically, that is, innovate and then progress and develop like in the most advanced countries. So this implies that we do have an improvement agenda for improving the quality of our companies, the capabilities of our companies, so they're able to compete, but also so they are able to see or look at the opportunities that are available and diversify the economy. And I have many examples from my works in Colombia and Brazil, but this shows a paradox, because all the surveys in Latin America look fantastic in terms of company building. What we call the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor shows that Latin America is doing fantastic. We love entrepreneurship. We perceive that our capacity are excellent, and we're not afraid of failure. But the problem is that when we look activities, these spin-offs, new companies, business people leaving one kind of a company and starting a new one, we're way below the OECD, innovation way below the OECD, and part of that is because many of our companies are these micro companies that don't pay much in terms, so we're looking that if we think that the informal sector is going to push growth, forget it, it's not going to happen. But the other thing is that these transformational business people, there is something that we're lacking here, is a term of the surroundings, but also capacities of the business people themselves. So, for example, if we look at business people that build companies where they actually employ people, it's always them that register this at the beginning. It's not that they, start slowly and then formalize. No, they register from the very beginning. They actually do start and register. This is a serious company, you know, they register before the state and so on. And Latin America and the Caribbean, in terms of this group of companies, is beyond, below Europe and Central Asia, below from North America. So we have here in crude number of business people we are lacking. But also looking at the capacity of business people, obviously something is happening. Sorry, this is my problem with technology. When we look at the World Management Survey, we can see that all the countries in Latin America, we're not in the frontier, at the border. It's the bigger companies that are actually further from the best practices in terms of management. So there is work to be done so that our serious business people who are educated move towards the frontier in terms of managerial practices and technical practices. Looking at the surroundings, Chile has done a tremendous effort, more than any other country in Latin America, in terms of having favorable surroundings, in terms of foreign and domestic business people. But I can show you that the region, as you see, there's a lot of complaints in terms of getting financing, in terms of human capital restriction. And this is not just small companies. We have this graph here of Chile, and even the super big companies are saying that I have financing problem, but my main issue is human capital. So we have a problem of human capital in multidimensional. And here, so I'm sorry, I'm at the wrong. So obviously, we still have an agenda in terms of maintaining, as Carla was saying, maintaining and improving our surroundings where we work, where companies, foreign and domestic companies work. But we also have an important agenda in terms of training for our business people and obviously the workforce. This is important. I'm going to finish here. I'm taking too much time. But I just want to make a quick review of these three books. The first and the second are important for Chile. And we also have these collection that's called the Productivity Project, which was inspired by Latin America. And what's lacking as Chile? Are we doing everything well? But we're not growing in terms of productivity. So we have many aspects of productivity here. And thank you very much for your time, for your patience. And that's it. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. This is a very interesting presentation where we're able to analyze and look at what's happening in Latin America and its position. We know that all these geopolitical changes, there is some very relevant points that we'd like to highlight, and this could also be part of the analysis in terms of training, education. What are we doing with entrepreneurs? How they have to, in a way, be more transformative in the market. And would like to thank the presentation, William Maloney. Very, very detailed with graphs and with international examples on terms of how can we incorporate those ideas, and they could be a guide to what is coming up in 2026, and perhaps revert some numbers in Latin America regarding their global position in terms of growth. Also, we know that our country, we can celebrate that our country grew in 2025, it grew by 17%, but still things that have to be done in terms of training, human capital, work in innovation, research, work with universities that somehow have to also work with this cooperation with the private sector and thus move forward. We're going to continue with these conversations. We see there's some movement behind my back right now, and I would like to introduce what's going to happen in the coming minutes. In this session, we're going to gather very important women who work in strategic sectors in mining, infrastructure, financing, technology. And they will reflect on the perspectives and challenges that our country is facing nowadays, but also the strategic position that we have. So this is going to be part of what we're going to listen to. After that, we're going to have a break, but during this morning, we're going to have very interesting panels regarding on how we can continue reflecting how our country can be one step ahead of the volatility that we see in this world, and we just heard about that in William's presentation. So I would like to share with you that geopolitical factors, as we were listening to recently, the agenda, infrastructure was a key element. We're talking about Mexico's example. We know that our country has a very advantageous position. We have to keep on obviously continue taking advantage, and these are key sectors to revert figures in the growth of Latin America. And of course, there's this competition between Chile and the United States. The main focus here was on how that could be a great opportunity for our region. So that's also part of what I will let you know that we're going to listen in this upcoming panel. So we're going to start then with Sebastián Aguirre, economical news person. He's going to be the conductor of this panel, and it's special that it's going to be women from different areas that will lead us through a very interesting conversation. Sebastián, go ahead. Thank you, Vivi, for that presentation. How are you doing? Good morning. Thank you for joining us. So stimulating to look at this big hall full of people, everybody obviously interested in the subject that we're going to talk to this morning, and also looking at what's going to happen in this scenario and regarding how our country is going to be able to face this high uncertainty scenario. And the conversation today with this panel, we're going to have the perspective of women leaders and perspectives on key industries for global challenges, and we're going to have time. That's great. We're going to have a lot of time. Fortunately, today we're going to have the possibility of listening to our guests' perspectives in a scenario, in a ever-changing economical and geopolitical scenario, with the uncertainty levels. Well, we know uncertainty is part of the landscape, but uncertainty probably is higher than before. We're going to give particular emphasis, perhaps looking forward. And this puts investors on alert, which is obviously natural. We also believe that this uncertainty has a role in the creation of opportunity, and that's also the point we would like to talk today. Look at what are the opportunities for Chile and for the economies of the region, which we know obviously that has direct incidence on what happens in Chile. So we have a mixture of uncertainty and high potential opportunities. There are obviously gaps that have to continue being closed so we can accelerate the development of some sectors which are called to move and push forward economical growth. And as Carla was saying, this is an urgent conversation, especially in the context of what's happened this past week. This panel is going to be very interesting. It connects different experiences, different trajectories, different industries, and I believe this is going to enrich this conversation. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. Here we have Analia Rojas, Executive Director of the Chilean Renewable Energies Association. Welcome, Analia. We'll also have Amparo Cornejo, Director of the Mining Board, Chief Sustainability Officer. Amparo, good morning. We'll also have Gloria Hutt, President of COPSA. Thank you for joining us. Camila Gatica, Senior Manager of Amazon Web Services and Director of Chilean Association, ACTI. And with Pilar Concha, General Manager of the Chilean Manager of Investment Funds, ACAFI. Welcome, Pilar. So let's start with a broader vision of the scenario that we're facing in this context that we're talking about with a lot of changes and uncertainty. I would like to start from each one of yours experience. What are the main global factors that are influencing investment decisions and how those decisions impact in countries like Chile with the particularities that we have? Amparo, let's start with you. Well, good morning. Thank you very much for this invitation. I would like to start saying how proud I am to be in a women's panel when we've been talking about the feminization of society, and if women give rationality or emotionality to this. So I'm very proud to see all my colleagues here talking on such relevant matters. From the perspective of the mining industry, I see a lot of people from this industry in the room, but we never imagined that the prices of copper that we're looking at today. But beyond the conjunction, I believe that the demand for copper comes mainly, it's been growing based on very solid reasons that have to do with decarbonization, electromobility, the growth in Latin America and Asia with technology, digitalization. So we are in a juncture that is unique. It's very virtuous for the mining industry and mainly for Chile. There are all the fundamentals for growing. I believe that in the past few years, how industry has continued betting on Chile. When we look forward, investment projects go beyond the $100 million and $100 billion, sorry, and nowadays mining and copper in particular, not only are we looking at new projects, but there's also some growth space in the brownfield projects, which means increasing production in places that we are already operating. And I believe that this has a high impact because it means bringing more tons of copper faster and also doing it with lower environmental impact in places that are already where the projects are already happening. So I believe that this rally of copper and what it means for Chile is a great opportunity. Obviously, it has to do with taxes and the impact it has on society. Also, it has to do with the mining ecosystem. I believe in Chile we have a very robust system. We have suppliers. There is a whole chain. And William Maloney was just talking about human capital. I believe that if there is an industry where Chile has capacity in terms of people, professional quality, is the mining area. So there are a series of positive pressures. Obviously there are risks, but I believe that we keep on competing with other countries in the region, like countries like Peru, for example. Peru is developing in a very intensive way. But I also believe that the potential growth that Argentina can have in mining could have an impact, especially in our resource and our talent. We have a risk of loss of these. Could those developments in region make a better investment scenario for Chile? Yeah, well, Chile has the main aspects, which is having the resources, having the financial stability, clear rules of the game, professional capacity. I believe that there is also an environmental system that's robust. And there is some pressure because we have a shared conviction of all the actors that we have to continue deepening what we are doing in terms of moving forward with environmental licenses, and we have to continue developing this based on the recent modifications. And we also have something that is perhaps unique and has to do with the acceptance of mining. 5 years ago, it was very different. Today, I believe all the stakeholders have focused on relating with the communities where we operate, and I also believe that this use or focus on electromobility, the use of mining in day-to-day life makes it closer with different actors, stakeholders in society. And with young people, we see that young people want to study mining, technical careers related. And 5 years ago, this was not thought of. So to close this first question, I believe that we are in an exceptional point, and mining can continue being a motor to move the country forward.
And Lily, what are the factors that have an incidence in the decision of investment in energy? Well, thank you. I really want to thank for this time for a technical discussion led by women in times where we're also, we're working on the balance, not only from 2025, but from the periods, the end of this administration, the beginning of the next one, and the challenges that industry, a lot of industries, we're looking at the capital and the international markets, and we see how this will be a priority in the agenda. So I think this is a great opportunity to share that and to take notes, right? So thank you. We see, looking from the energy standpoint, and particularly the electric sector, we'll see the distinction between the energy and electrification. I think that's quite important. And we are seeing how today there's a trend towards less availability of foreign capital. Therefore, there's more demands, or the capital is more selective in terms of projects that they decide to allocate their investments. And so that demand or more selectivity, of course, that creates a stress, in the set of projects that will be eligible. Therefore, it's not only in Chile, but in the world. Today, everything that has to do with the environment, which goes beyond, energy in the sector of renewable energies, there's this belief that it's just enough with, having natural competitive advantages. So many times we have seen a discussion of the economical agenda in the investment, Chile, just because they have lots of radiation or lots of wind and some sources were the main source of electricity for us. If we look at the history of electrification in Chile, sometimes we may think that's enough to ensure the flow of investment. And what we have learned, I think, renewable investments, I think they have been happening for 10, 15 years, and that's not enough. And so that's where I would like to share with you how sophistication and the regulation of markets matter. The electric world and the energy sector is hugely regulated, and regulation is a positive factor because it allows you to organize a sector that, before we start with the forum, it's a complex area. It's an arid place. So that depth and that perfecting markets, that basically works so that we can provide what we have called in the agenda, the main principle, the jurisdictional certainty that is needed by any investor, but particularly in a regulated market, and how things will evolve and what are the reforms that are needed. And so this does not mean that markets should not be reformed because regulation already exists. Quite the contrary. Today, in the opportunity of energy transition, which only represent the opportunity for investment and for more infrastructure and rechange and the relocation of investment. Like William said, this is what's happening in this investment sector. We're relocating and we're transforming in a sector that traditionally worked based on hydrothermal energy to a sector that is highly based on renewable energies and storage, and that changes things. Now, regulations, of course, if they can be modified, or if we need to modify them, we need jurisdictional certainty in the sense that what are the changes and in which direction they will happen. So I think that is the set, that is the state of the art. We have a market that is hugely attractive for that effect of substitution that economists call, changing a way of operating a market for another way of operating. That's what's happening today from conventional to renewable, but we need to have jurisdictional certainty. Therefore, reforms not only need to be chosen and prioritized, but also discussed, and we need to consider the technical dialogue in depth. We need to consider the entire sector, the entire ecosystem that is around the construction of this regulation. This is extremely relevant in this new administration, and the jurisdiction certainty today has a different factor, in the international context. So with the clarity of the rules, yes, we are competing actually. Right, Gloria, let's look at your view from infrastructure. Thank you for having me. I'm very proud of being here in the panel, and this has been quite a discussion when it comes to rationality, and I'm going to do my own intervention here. I would also like to thank the presentation of William, which was very clear and illustrative. Now, when we talk about infrastructure, public infrastructure, we're talking about private investment in association with the government, but also an investment that causes a social impact. That's quite important. And while we're living in such a volatile world, and we had measured the index of volatility, we need to look in the long term. These are all investments of 30 years or more. And when we look at the world in 2050, for example, we see that there will be a big concentration of areas in this urban space will be a scarce resource, and we will see this tripling, 3 times almost 70 trillion of passengers in the kilometers. So that means infrastructure, for example, for mobility, is going to be an urgent resource. We'll need so that we can have a satisfactory level of life. But there are other areas of public infrastructure, such as hospitals, airports. We have been diversifying, and also prison systems, and different areas. Now, what we see is that there is a complex scenario because there's such volatility. And because Chile is a small country, so it competes in the region with Brazil. In Brazil, one bidding process includes 5 highways or 3 airports. Here, it's just minor scale. So it's even more difficult to be able to compete, and you need to work with more resources. So that is the jurisdictional certainty, as previously mentioned. So the fact that you have a solid framework makes investment less risky, or at least there's less of a probability for things not to continue happening. So I think Chile has to be very careful with what they have accomplished. In September this year, we'll commemorate 30 years since the first car that went through a concession process at the tunnel in Melon, and that was awarded in 1993, and the first car went through that in 1995, 2 years later. Now, currently, since the granting of the projects until we move the first machines, we have about 5 years. So So that's a concerning symptom, a symptom of risk, for example, in matters of ensuring recollection in the long term with regulation or with mechanisms that make it really hard to keep things, for example, the free flow toll. If we incorporate recollection risk, some suggestions. And on the other hand, Chile needs to be very competitive. And sadly, when we look at the World Index of Competitiveness in regions, Latin America is still at the end in every level, and there's 4 areas that determine competitiveness. There's the competitiveness of the government, of businesses, of infrastructure, and public systems. And in competitiveness and infrastructure, this is quite low. And so there's a challenge and there's gaps. And we think that uncertainties are being more noticeable. The last processes and competences, there's been 1 or 2 people bidding for the process, and it's usually 1. It's not because the price is a competition, because there's a regulated price, but there's an increase in the risks are associated to ensure, you can never ensure, but at least making sure the project is feasible in the long term. And that also has to do with the investment, decision. And I really, but there's another impact because what William said, having more companies provides more innovation, more diversity, different methods, different specialists. So the deterioration, is in the entire system. So we are very proud of what's been happening in Chile in the last 30 years. Over 100 projects, over $25,000 million of investment, association, partnerships, public-private partnerships. So I think, it's a great society. There's a contract, and partners need to have a reasonable balance between parts. So we see how that balance is, it's how we're incorporating some risks, and it's important to unlock some projects. Just to keep in mind, from 2020 to 2025, there are 500 projects that are granted with different natures, with structured financing. So out of those, not more than 3 have actually moved along. So it's over $10 million. So that would be very good for economies. So unlocking all of that is urgent. And I think it's the first measure, the first thing I would ask for the next president. Yes, and we have asked them that. Yes, Camila. Yes, I'm sorry, I have this microphone, but it's not working. But, I would like to second what everyone said here. I'm really thankful of belonging in an area that is a step behind, so I can be in the other areas in the panel. And I think from the technological world, what's good is that there's a point where we all agree on, which is regulation, and we'll get there soon. But when it comes to business, we look at things globally. I'd like to talk about AI. It's something we've heard about and everywhere. The bus stop, we hear all of that everywhere. And so we see how there's an important growth in terms of investment in AI. We see this is an important figure, and it says about 39% of growth in AI and about 53.8% in generative AI. So we see a relevant trend, and of course in our company, since we provide cloud services, we need to have a robust system and a framework that will allow us to continue moving forward. And this is a relevant focus for investment for countries. And Chile today is in a position, where we should be proud of. In the last study in AI, Chile was in the first place, and it's something that we need to be mindful of and keeping it, and that's where we'll converge on some areas, responsible regulation and enabling regulation where we can safeguard people, but at the same time we can allow development and we can incentivize adoption, which is something that William mentioned as well when we talk about the adoption of technologies, the focus on adoption and not so much in regulation, and having enabling regulating frameworks that will allow that to have a harmonization, which is something we see is quite complex. We see there's different verticals, different infrastructures. Technology has another regulation. So I think that those areas should create certainties for those that want to invest in Chile. And that's what we preach for regulation, to regulate the use of technology beyond technology itself. We know this is something that's moving forward. Years ago, we were not talking about agents, and now we're all talking about agents. So when we talk about regulating, having a regular coordination where we look at different areas, for example, we have a data center plan, we have a national plan for AI, we have a cybersecurity bill that came out last year, and also another bill coming this year for personal data. And so we need to create an attractive system for those that want to invest in Chile. And the last point that I'd like to touch on, so that we can leave time for other questions, because we could be here forever. When it comes to investment and sustainability, I think when we talk about investing in Chile, once again, we're in a privileged sector. We have someone here working in renewable energy. We're really proud of it, and I would like to say that about 100% of the energy that we get in Amazon is compensated by renewable energy. We have a water positive commitment that we met 7 years ahead, so now we return more water to communities, more than the water we're using directly. And so when we talk about investing in a country, and especially in technology, is how will that converge with sustainability and investment. I think that's what I wanted to highlight. And it's a competitive sector, right? Technology. We have other countries in the region that are also doing their own efforts in getting the best position. You ask any regulator, any authority in Latin America, they all want to be a regional hub. We're a regional hub, invest here. So there's no silver bullet, so that we can look at that from the AWS. We have different areas. We need to look at adoption. We need to have a focus on sustainability, something that is quite relevant. And when we talk about data center, it's not this idea of, living in an area that is completely empty. So it's not only about the demand and what William said, how different verticals are adopting technology. How are we really internalizing them in local companies? And how do we see that these are being used so that we can be more efficient in different areas? Yes, and there's a huge opportunity, right? Pilar, let's look at McAfee's view. Thank you, Kailanis, for the invitation. It's an honor having this wonderful group of women sharing. It's not easy being the last one. You have mentioned everything that I wanted to mention, but all panelists here are wonderful. They have mentioned many things that I had considered. And on one hand, I'm really happy to see that there is quite a consensus in how regulation and jurisdictional certainty are key. So today, regardless of the political sector where you come from, we are quite aware of the need of providing investment and making sure that foreign investment is important. Carla also mentioned that in her presentation. And so we need for people from abroad coming in to invest in Chile. So that's why we need to work on different factors, which will help us, because when there's no jurisdictional certainty, and like we say in Chile, when the rules of the game are changed, people just leave, and that's sort of automatic. And in a way, we need to build an ecosystem that has clear rules, not only when it comes to infrastructure and long-term projects, but I see that from the financial standpoint, where as we see regulation projects, we see how there's a robust market that can finance projects coming from abroad, because while foreign people come from foreign investment, I think that it's a good mix when the foreign capital is associated or partnering with Chilean capital. And as we have good platforms, because on one hand, human capital, yes, there's people that are well prepared, but the ecosystem is not created by people only. There's institutions, there's platforms, and when you have the right regulation, and when this is all well considered and it's all structured in technical matters and it goes beyond political colors or personal opinions, in a way that can strengthen and make financing more robust. And it's not only about foreigners coming to invest in Chile, but also Chileans through their own savings. They can have attractive profitability for the retirement, for infrastructure projects, or if there's a mid-term investments that could be beneficial for everyone. So I firmly believe in how robust the market should be, so that it can all be financed. And just to wrap up and to complement, because I wanted to mention what Camilo mentioned, the ESG matter, for us as an association, that's really important. I think that foreigners are looking at this more and more often, and while there's greenwashing questioning and some people saying this is no longer fashionable, I think this is something that we should not let go, and it's something for the long term, and we need to consider all conversations. We need to have women participating in decision making and in investment making, decision making, and I think that when creating these ecosystems, we need to consider all factors that we should see at all times. It's not only an environmental thing, it's also social factors, and when there's social issues, we see problems in the country as well. And in terms of governance, we need for human capital, which is what we need to strengthen, we need for it to happen under an appropriate governance, and we need to have diversity and good policies. I have a general round of questions, just if you can share something brief, but it could summarize what we're discussing now. When there's an era where there's more fragmentation, where the rules of the game are being redefined, can Chile project and promote itself towards investors as a refuge, as a platform where things are more steady, there's a long-term investment? Well, I think that if we were to look at the region, yes, we are like a safe house, and I think that's why Chile is a good platform to then go out to the next of the continent, but we cannot ensure that. And having the fear of not being sure, that's good, because we cannot take any false steps. Camila, what would you say? I would like to second what you're saying. I think it's in Chile, there's a key moment now. We've been told and we feel, and I will quote that, it's the Europe or Latin America, we're so steady, and we have an economy that has been quite steady, while there's been fluctuations and difficult years in comparison to our neighboring countries. We're quite steady. So in that terms, from in AWS, we want to put the first data center with over 4,500 million, with a cluster of data center which will be serviced for the entire region, so from Chile towards the region, as you just mentioned. But I think that we should not panic. And, not long ago, there was a Strength Partners study for AWS saying that costs, for example, for compliance, going back to regulations, today with the regulations that we have, out of $100 companies investing for regulations, 19 will go to regulation compliance. So what's happening now with this intention of regulating and moving forward and upping the standard, and how we continue with this position, there's a fear in 73% of companies, many of them small and medium companies, startups like Willie mentioned. There's a fear of, those $19 being so much more, even twice or three times more, if we continue having this regulation burden on companies. So it's something to consider. Yes, thank you.
Gloria, Amparo, and Elia, any comments? Yes, if we want to be a refuge, which is a tremendous advantage to compensate on size, if we want to be the super refuge, we have the size that we have, so that's disadvantage in itself. But we have to reinforce this. It's not spontaneous. It's not because we've met more than 100 projects. We can lose those very fast. I believe that I read some opinions sometimes that are very irresponsible, where the fact that a concession has a profit is demonized. If we look at this image of this fat person counting bills, if we look at it, then a great part, many of these international pension funds are the financiers of these projects. So those funds cannot go anywhere. They've come here. For example, the new industrial bridge over the Biobío River. It's the first urban concession outside the metropolitan region. And the investor is a pension fund investor. So we have to really treat that with extreme care, because we cannot risk the pension funds, for example, in this case from Australia, with some very irresponsible regulations. We've talked a lot about permits, and permits are necessary, but there are some regulatory proposals that just break this. We have to take care of that. I believe that in mining, in a way, Chile is a refuge, and investments are long-term and resources are here. But I think that the discussion here is how urgent is it to us to develop more mining and not distract ourselves in terms of competences and what kind of percentage of this investment goes to other countries. We cannot miss the opportunity of developing minerals with a sense of urgency. And in agreement with Gloria, I personally am bothered when we speak about permissology, permits, because I believe we reduce the level of this discussion, because all the stakeholders require for a robust, clear, predictable systems for permits gives us certainty. Analia, the refuge today is an active sector. Chile has become the focus of Latin America for investments in renewable energy and storage. In 2025, we had 4.5 billion in investments, and 3.5 of those were for renewable energies. But there are also $8,500 million are for renewable energies. The problem with records is when and how are we going to keep on breaking these records? Is this sustainable? It's not just reaching a record, but also being able to overcome it and sustain it over time. So therein comes my thoughts. In terms of refuge, we cannot put a limit to this refuge. It has to be expansible. And I would like to join this regarding the importance that electrification has for the purpose of the exchange of the enormous amount of money that we spend for fossil imports. They're not just for electricity, it's for in terms of transportation, industry, mining. Mining is pretty much electrified, but in Chile, the rate of electrification is low. The same with the rest of Latin American countries. It doesn't go beyond 23%. And nevertheless, 64% of our energy, global consumptions, are dependent on fossil fuels that are imported by 98%. How cannot we be worried about this? So the great opportunity of this refuge is to increase the size of the electrical market based on storage and renewable energies and any other sources that are able to generate energy that can actually lower that account of imports. It's $15 billion in imports. It's 4 points of the gross domestic product. So we spend all that money importing fossil fuels. So the vision is to become a refuge for investments, yes, in renewable energies and storage, but the limitation cannot be the size of the electrical market. We have to electrify. After this round, we're going to have some questions where we're going to actually deepen in each of the sectors, and I would like to start with the sector of investments, Pilar, with investment funds. According to the data of ACAFI, the participation of foreign investment in Chile is 6%. What do we need to move forward external investment in that sector? Okay, and the industry of funds is an industry that manages $40 billion. Only 6% comes from foreigners that come to invest as such. It's very noticeable that this market we had foreigners coming in when we changed regulations in 2016. Before that, it was 0. And that's when we had certain limits that allowed foreign investors to come, and the market has grown and has made us more optimistic, because in the end, I believe we can keep on growing in those lines. But it's very recent from 2016. So I believe that first off, we have to show Chile, as Chile continues being an attractive destination for investment, they will come, whether it's through funds or directly. Doesn't really matter how. But we do have to ensure this, and I think we're all in agreement. We all agree with this. So the industry of funds, just like NSGC, this regulation allowed to create this way for foreigners to come to Chile. I believe that is also extremely important to review regulation issues. Just like Camila was saying, we've had tremendous regulatory load with threats of investment rules that could actually end investments for funds. So the idea is that foreigners that come to invest in Chile, they are able to invest in very attractive and necessary for the country, which many times we as Chileans don't tend to invest. We have Canadian funds that invest in agro-resources in the south, and it's not this, old capitalist having lunch in New York. We're talking about this person who are a Canadian teacher who put his savings in a pension fund, and those resources are being used to invest in Chile. So I believe we're at a point where we have conversations and discussions of looking how to improve our ecosystem in general. So we need to generate the rules and incentives to bring foreign capital, which helps us in terms of work and growth. I have a comment. I think you both have mentioned the existence of what's behind investments, in pension funds, for example. I believe that we have an obligation as engines of the economy to share this better with society. I think there is a joint work. How do we share this outlook of business that, this contrast between a caricature, a business person versus to what's actually real. So we have to also influence the public opinion. Camila, in terms of digital infrastructure, this has been a very fast development. Chile's been pioneer in technology in the area, developing 5G, for example, underwater cable, the data centers. So what do we need to do to consolidate that position, in the position of Chile as a digital hub in the context that AI has a more and more relevant role? Well, thank you. There are many points here. It has to do with human capital. I believe Page Partners showed a number, if I'm not wrong, 48% of positions in IT are vacant because of lack of trained people. There is an important gap. This is Chile. Yeah, this is Chile indeed. And what William Malone was saying is we're importing talent when we're supposed to develop it here. We have to develop public and private alliances. We've trained more than 100,000 people in cloud capabilities, AI, and I believe that's also an opportunity that we have to start in covering those gaps. In regulatory terms, we've all mentioned our pains. We have to talk in terms of recognizing the operational impact that regulations have. We see sometimes that, everyone has their own agenda. We have a law for cybersecurity that we have to report in 3 hours when you have 72 hours. When there's a cybersecurity issue, we have a definition of critical infrastructure for cybersecurity. So there are different regulations. We talk about financial issues, but financial people have to report to 5 or 6 different institutions. So in terms of sustainability, that we can have the tools for renewable energy. I believe that the lack of incentives is something that has to be addressed. We're always looking into how to regulate it, how to control it, how we protect ourselves from these new technologies, but we don't talk about how are we adopt and promote them. And this is something that we have to take a look. The last, I think the timeline for implementation regulations are too much. Every time that the companies are demanded of something new, it calls for an internal adapting process, which is impacts on operations, and that means that companies have to change human capital, internal protocols, and that calls for time, and it generates an impact when we try to keep on being a hub. So that has impact. I think I've said my what I wanted to say. Gloria, in terms of infrastructure, this is an area that's very well known by foreign investors. How do we attract new stakeholders? What do we have to protect? What has to be promoted? What risks do we need to mitigate to bring new investors? I believe there are some things in the short term, in terms of management, that could probably give more dynamism that this industry has already proved that it can show, and that it's actually slowed down, maybe in terms of management on the side of the state. Basically, in terms of coordination between organs of the state to give permits, for example, and those are things that can be solved in the short term. And we've suggested the formation of a group that depends on the president, dedicated especially on developing an agenda for solving what's stuck. But also have to look at the long term. In the long term, there are some very important scenarios. For example, with the pension reform that's going to increase by 40% the mass of local savings. Prepare good legislation that those funds are able to be used an alternative for investment along with international funds. That's something that can become something very attractive. The other way in which this can be attractive is to start thinking in terms of when the first contracts are actually ending. How can we have this concept of networks? We've given individual projects, and each project with the concept of project finance that has to be properly financed. But we look at urban highways, and they have their network, and they have different contracts, and there are some that have different pricing. So that affects the possibility of having a more fluid relationship with users, where we can offer them a good idea of the service quality that we have. But we have to start looking in terms of larger projects, but making large-scale investments. For example, in hospitals, we adjudicate for hospitals, or the same with the airports. To me, that is the next element in the scale and diversification. There are sectors that we haven't addressed. For example, last year in São Paulo, in Brazil, they gave the concession for the building and maintenance of 29 high schools. If we used the same mechanism of concession for educational infrastructure, we could probably give a big jump. Let's not forget that in Atacama, there were 30,000 children without classes because there was infrastructure problem. That's an irretrievable damage. We have to look perhaps in the same way. We can invest the same way that are done with hospitals. But the Ministry of Health administers these hospitals. So in this case, the Educational Authority can keep them operating this, but in terms of infrastructure, can be offered or developed in a more homogeneous way. So the challenges are huge, but what moves me, as Amparo was saying, as Ipso was saying, and there's a recent survey in the levels of satisfaction in countries with the quality of infrastructure. Chile is around 74% in terms of airports and highways. So the recognition to the standard is there. But if we go to, for example, to people's opinion on companies or the service that they deliver, the perception falls, and there is a gap that needs to be met. And this gap is delivering the service in public infrastructure that belongs to all. People sometimes think that this infrastructure is property of people. So it belongs to all of us here sitting. Thank you, Gloria. Ampario, on the side of mining, we know how relevant this is to energy transition. How do you evaluate the positioning of Chile at a global level to attract investment in critical minerals? I believe Chile is synonymous of mining and synonymous of copper. I believe we have very consolidated industry that has a variety of having state actors like Codelco, foreign investors. I believe that the main question here is more than how the positioning is, how do we maintain our competitivity towards the future? Institutionality in terms of we had a discussion on royalties. We finished with a very good conversation, and we also have to look at what other countries are doing, like Argentina that has this RIGI. So these tax stability models that help the industry develop are very important. And so as an industry, I think we believe that any tax issue can generate noise and impact. So we're an industry that's very much committed to sustainability standards, not just producing more copper, but also how it is being produced is very relevant. Environmental regulation meeting, to me, is very important. The relationship with communities. I believe that if we don't have the social legitimacy, we cannot operate, and our capacity for continuing producing copper will be impacted. So we cannot forget that. I believe that it's also an industry that's operating with a lot of diversity, not just in gender. We've seen Chile is the country that has the largest participation of women in the mining industry, but also it's an industry that's bringing a diversity of formation and bringing different lines of thought and training and cultures as well. I believe that's very remarkable. I believe Chile is very well positioned. Probably what's happening today is we're facing a new phenomena related to strategic partnerships. I believe that for developing new minerals, industry is showing that there is an appetite and a direct action of developing these partnerships. In our case, we've announced and we are implementing this partnership with Anglo American to become Anglo-Tech, which is going to be one of the most relevant companies. But this has an impact in terms of efficiency and the capacity of developing more copper. We've seen the same with Codelco and Anglo American. So I believe Chile is very well positioned. There is history. We need to focus on competitiveness, and we are working on innovation and how to manage from a business perspective this tremendous challenge of producing copper for the goals that the world has set itself. In the end, finally, Analia, on the energy sector, could we project the tendencies that we're faced this year? 2025 was a strong year in terms of green hydrogen. What's coming this year? Transmission, storage, where are more opportunities?
Thank you for the question. I think that we need to separate narratives and how we communicate things. the driver of investment in 2025, it was not the green hydrogen projects. There's lots of ads here. We need to announce some projects, and some are materialized. In 2025, we materialized renewable energies, solar energies, storage, wind energy, and also green hydrogen. Those projects have contributed to the installation of, I call it, the economical diplomacy. So it's a powerful tool for strategic positioning in Chile in regards to, a factor that will be essential for decarbonization of other sectors that are not electrical. But competitive green hydrogen needs competitive green energy, renewable energy. So that's why we should not stay ahead of ourselves. So the trends for 2026, 2030. I wanted to wrap this forum, answering William Malloy's question. He's not here in the room now, but he mentioned something that, and I hope you can all answer the same question. I think we can all do that. He asked, who's going to be the Chilean Hitachi, right? What's going to be the industry that will mobilize and that will accomplish not only mobilization of capital and, the creation of an infrastructure service that is of quality, etc., but something that will get us to the next level? I think it's electrification. And the entire industry that is committed to electrification, and that's going to create savings in terms of fuel import and also benefits that will be focused on consumers. But there's a risk here. And the risk today is that the population is not perceiving the benefits of energy transition. And so, and it's mainly through the energy bills, electric bills. So there's a huge challenge from the standpoint of what we need to do, and I will link it to why do we need to focus the energy trends to those areas that will manage to create a benefit for the transformation. And for consumers, those are industries, us. That's why we manage to see why transformation is necessary, because if this is not necessary from the standpoint of a benefit, maybe this will not happen. So therefore, in the energy sector, and particularly in the electric market, to be able to reach that electrification, we need to reinforce storage systems, transmission, the flexibility of the system, so the system being able to respond and not happening at 25F, right? And so in the end, the prioritization of those trends will depend on the understanding of the next authorities and the public-private collaboration. We have the presidential area, we'll have 11 positions where the agenda of the next 5 or 4 years should be focused on, but we need to prioritize. And we need to have, the Hitachis of each sector. And one last tip, the export account of services in Chile, it's approximately $3,000 million a year, $3,000 million a year. So of course, that transformation we've had, when it comes to renewables storage, that is providing learning from the infrastructure standpoint and also for human capital. And so that is a huge opportunity to be able to have a new expansion of the services account, which in the end will help us export to the rest of the region, which is in the same path, the path of decarbonization, not only in the electrical sector, but in the energy that we consume. So how can we not be capable of agreeing on a national electrification plan and an expert plan for services that are related to decarbonization and energy transition? Those are my 2 bets for 2026, for 2030. Thank you. We have only a few minutes to close the conversation, and I'd like to take if you could take just 2-3 minutes in responding, but I'd like to know what are the main signals of trust or signs of trust that Chile should prioritize. We've talked about jurisdiction certainty, regulations, about the clarity in terms of permits, and so that's kind of the most important thing. But what other things you think are important from the investor standpoint? Analia, we'll start with you. Yes, jurisdictional certainty, and I'd like to clarify something. A jurisdictional certainty does not mean that we cannot propose reforms so that markets can be optimized, and that happens in every sector. So many times I hear that when there's an improvement that proposes to optimize the market, I see that there's some resistance based on the argument of jurisdictional certainty. So let's not mix those up. Now, second, I think that the capacity for communication of benefits, particularly in energy transition today, that's critical, and it's something that we need to learn how to narrate, and we need to be able to explain how can that be effective. We cannot do transformation if the benefits of transformation are not properly communicated. And just a message for my industry colleagues here, we need to learn how to communicate better. And that's also part of the complementary contribution of the signs of trust that we need to have. Because if we cannot be good communicators of the benefits of the transformation, it's very unlikely that this will happen, and it's the responsibility of the industry. Thank you. Analia, now Amparo. Apart from jurisdictional certainty, the tax administration, I think there's something quite relevant that has to do with the dialogue in the country. And I think it goes beyond the focus of the sectors where we operate. I have to move around in Latin America and other neighboring countries. I want to mention them, but there's always like a defense in the country, when it comes to investors. And I think in Chile, we are usually tempted to mention negative things abroad. I'm not saying that we should not be transparent, but I think when we look a country from outside, we see there's polarization and low capacity for a dialogue. That's a strength that Chile has had, and so I feel we need to go back to dialoguing and because investors, it's not like they are looking at things through a screen. No, they come here, they talk to you, they interact. And so I think if we have that capacity for dialogue and understanding, we'll probably provide a support for everything that we do more technically. Thank you, Amparo. Gloria? I think Chile has an opportunity here that is based on evidence. And Chile has managed to bring investment because they have honored their word. And I think there's an opportunity for the new government in doing the explicit declaration and inviting investors. If your words matter and your promises matter, when the president offers a certain backup and an investment of healthy investment in Chile, that is something that's quite credible, and there's an element there. And of course, we need to have we need to test that, and that is assessed with specialists, with measurements that aim in that direction. And we need to put together a backup for that promise. So I also agree with Amparo. I went over the politics. I was in politics just for a brief time. I wanted to put engineering in politics, but I didn't have time for that. But I realized that sadly there's some incentives that are set in a direction that is not very helpful. And deadlines are usually related to elections, and it could be more attractive for voters with a short-term look than a safeguard and something in the long term that benefits voters. So I think that there's something that has to do with the political world, because we need to push agreements that are valuable and that can help everyone and bring investment And lastly, Chile became attractive because it broke lots of schemes and investment came because in the first concessions we have the free flow tolls that nowhere else in the world they had it. There was only 2 areas in Israel and Canada, but there was a massive experience, and we dared to take that leap. And then we started with hospital concessions and airports, and I think that we're kind of stuck there. But innovation and everything that's provided by technology, it's very valuable. So being able to offer contracts that are more dynamic, technology allows to break schemes. And so at the moment we're in, it's not about continuity, it's about looking at where we need to be located on. Thank you. I would like to also second what Gloria said. It's about staying within our vision. We look at these plans, a national plan, a data center, a national strategy with AI, upping the technology, having a strategy for the government by 2030, 2035, and how we'll look at different benefits. And that should be regardless of the administration. And if things change, well, we should have the same goal. And for the country, having this as a goal in the country, not in the government. In the case of AWS, our region started with a project of the government of President Piñera. Then we continue working with President Boric, and then we'll launch it with José Antonio Caz, the next president. So when a company wants to invest in Chile, they do it in the long term, and it's a long-term commitment. So that and for that to happen, you need to show that you are clear on what you're doing. And you need to show how incentives will happen in real instances, and how all of these conversations now will reinforce the message and when it comes to authorities and when it comes to meeting your word, because you are committed to the country, not to government. Pilar, we'll close with you. Well, not to go over the importance of macroeconomic factors and political factors and leaving everything aside and looking in the long term. I think what's important from different industries, we should work in different matters that will enable the capital coming into Chile. Looking at platforms, systems, and we just launched our manual, and how investors should come to Chile, how this is something we did with banks, so that we could show how we have different platforms, and we hope for everything to be mentioned in international platforms. And it's important for us, for industries, to understand and to adapt certain standards and international systems that will allow, as Gloria was saying, to go from one place to the other, from one highway to the other. For the ideas for when investors, when they come, they should be familiar with systems and with platforms that will bring investment. It's been quite the luxury having you all here. And let's give it up for everyone. Thank you for this morning's conversation. Thank you for joining us. Vivi, the floor is yours. Yes, to be honest, it's been really interesting, and there's many things that are the final reflection and the final thoughts. It was a technical conversation, but very necessary to put the focus on those things and the emergencies, which is what we have been debating. I would like to ask the panel to stay on the stage, and also the second panel, because we'll have our official picture. But I'd like to also mention that there's a break time. We'll have 15 minutes for a coffee break, and the idea is to talk, to analyze, to see networking, to see conversations, to have different conversations on what happened this morning. And well, the panel that just opened this conversation, highlighting women in mining, in engineering, infrastructure, financing, and technology. In this stage, we'll have official pictures, and the second panel, which, this is why you're all invited. will be analyzing the financial context in matters of investment. So after 15 minutes, please come back as soon as you can. We'll continue with more conversations during the seminar.
Es el momento de seguir creciendo y avanzando hacia un mejor futuro para todos y todas. Chile necesita consolidar el camino recorrido y proyectarlo hacia los desafíos que los nuevos tiempos exigen. Llegó la hora de ser un país más conectado, líder en energía verde y donde se desarrolle la innovación para la minería del futuro. Pero no podemos avanzar en esa ruta solos. Nuestro país ofrece oportunidades que requieren los socios correctos, que nos ayuden a llegar más rápido donde queremos ir y compartan nuestra visión. Te invitamos a descubrir nuestra cartera pública de oportunidades, la oportunidad de hacer nuevos negocios, con Chile como tu mejor socio. Construyamos el futuro, juntos.
Hoy, hablar de inversión extranjera no es solo hablar de negocios. Es hablar de innovación que potencie nuestro talento, de generar energías más limpias y los combustibles del futuro, de mejores empleos para todos y todas. Es hablar de electromovilidad que mueva nuestras ciudades, de tecnología para hacer volar nuestra imaginación. Es hablar de empujar una nueva mirada, más sostenible, más innovadora e inclusiva. Te invitamos a descubrir cómo las empresas extranjeras están creando, desde Chile, soluciones inteligentes para los desafíos globales. Inversión extranjera con propósito, que marca una diferencia.
Hoy, hablar de inversión extranjera no es solo hablar de negocios. Es hablar de innovación que potencie nuestro talento. Es hablar de generar energías más limpias, de mejores empleos para todos y todas. Es hablar de investigación para descubrir nuevas oportunidades, de capacitación para seguir aprendiendo a crecer. Es hablar de enfrentar juntos los problemas, de empujar una nueva mirada más sostenible, más innovadora e inclusiva. Te invitamos a descubrir cómo las empresas extranjeras están creando desde Chile avances y soluciones para los desafíos globales. Inversión extranjera con propósito, que marca una diferencia.
Invertir es mirar a largo plazo. Es buscar un socio ideal para crecer y desarrollarte de forma segura. Un lugar donde vivir y crear nuevos lazos. Es sumarse a una comunidad que sume su talento para hacer florecer tus ideas. Y para hacer que tus proyectos alcancen su máximo potencial y se transformen en nuevas ideas. Por décadas, Chile ha sido ese socio confiable para cientos de compañías extranjeras. Te invitamos a descubrir cómo las empresas extranjeras están reinvirtiendo en nuestro país, generando nuevos negocios y valor para sus compañías y para Chile.
Es el momento de seguir creciendo y avanzando hacia un mejor futuro para todos y todas. Chile necesita consolidar el camino recorrido y proyectarlo hacia los desafíos que los nuevos tiempos exigen. Llegó la hora de ser un país más conectado, líder en energía verde y donde se desarrolle la innovación para la minería del futuro. Pero no podemos avanzar en esa ruta solos. Nuestro país ofrece oportunidades que requieren los socios correctos, que nos ayuden a llegar más rápido donde queremos ir y compartan nuestra visión. Te invitamos a descubrir nuestra cartera pública de oportunidades, la oportunidad de hacer nuevos negocios, con Chile como tu mejor socio. Construyamos el futuro, juntos.
Hoy, hablar de inversión extranjera no es solo hablar de negocios. Es hablar de innovación que potencie nuestro talento, de generar energías más limpias y los combustibles del futuro, de mejores empleos para todos y todas. Es hablar de electromovilidad que mueva nuestras ciudades, de tecnología para hacer volar nuestra imaginación. Es hablar de empujar una nueva mirada, más sostenible, más innovadora e inclusiva. Te invitamos a descubrir cómo las empresas extranjeras están creando, desde Chile, soluciones inteligentes para los desafíos globales. Inversión extranjera con propósito que marca una diferencia.
Hoy, hablar de inversión extranjera no es solo hablar de negocios. Es hablar de innovación que potencie nuestro talento. Es hablar de generar energías más limpias, de mejores empleos para todos y todas. Es hablar de investigación para descubrir nuevas oportunidades, de capacitación para seguir aprendiendo a crecer. Es hablar de enfrentar juntos los problemas, de empujar una nueva mirada más sostenible, más innovadora e inclusiva. Te invitamos a descubrir cómo las empresas extranjeras están creando desde Chile avances y soluciones para los desafíos globales. Inversión extranjera con propósito, que marca una diferencia.
Invertir es mirar a largo plazo. Es buscar un socio ideal para crecer y desarrollarte de forma segura. Un lugar donde vivir y crear nuevos lazos. Es sumarse a una comunidad que sume su talento para hacer florecer tus ideas. Y para hacer que tus proyectos alcancen su máximo potencial y se transformen en nuevas ideas. Por décadas, Chile ha sido ese socio confiable para cientos de compañías extranjeras. Te invitamos a descubrir cómo las empresas extranjeras están reinvirtiendo en nuestro país, generando nuevos negocios y valor para sus compañías y para Chile.
Es el momento de seguir creciendo y avanzando hacia un mejor futuro para todos y todas. Chile necesita consolidar el camino recorrido y proyectarlo hacia los desafíos que los nuevos tiempos exigen. Llegó la hora de ser un país más conectado, líder en energía verde y donde se desarrolle la innovación para la minería del futuro. Pero no podemos avanzar en esa ruta solos. Nuestro país ofrece oportunidades que requieren los socios correctos, que nos ayuden a llegar más rápido donde queremos ir y compartan nuestra visión. Te invitamos a descubrir nuestra cartera pública de oportunidades, la oportunidad de hacer nuevos negocios, con Chile como tu mejor socio. Construyamos el futuro, juntos.
Hoy, hablar de inversión extranjera no es solo hablar de negocios. Es hablar de innovación que potencie nuestro talento, de generar energías más limpias y los combustibles del futuro, de mejores empleos para todos y todas. Es hablar de electromovilidad que mueva nuestras ciudades, de tecnología para hacer volar nuestra imaginación. Es hablar de empujar una nueva mirada, más sostenible, más innovadora e inclusiva. Te invitamos a descubrir cómo las empresas extranjeras están creando, desde Chile, soluciones inteligentes para los desafíos globales. Inversión extranjera con propósito, que marca una diferencia.
Hoy, hablar de inversión extranjera no es solo hablar de negocios. Es hablar de innovación que potencie nuestro talento. Es hablar de generar energías más limpias, de mejores empleos para todos y todas. Es hablar de investigación para descubrir nuevas oportunidades, de capacitación para seguir aprendiendo a crecer. Es hablar de enfrentar juntos los problemas, de empujar una nueva mirada más sostenible, más innovadora e inclusiva. Te invitamos a descubrir cómo las empresas extranjeras están creando desde Chile avances y soluciones para los desafíos globales. Inversión extranjera con propósito, que marca una diferencia.
Invertir es mirar a largo plazo. Es buscar un socio ideal para crecer y desarrollarte de forma segura. Un lugar donde vivir y crear nuevos lazos. Es sumarse a una comunidad que sume su talento para hacer florecer tus ideas. Y para hacer que tus proyectos alcancen su máximo potencial y se transformen en nuevas ideas. Por décadas, Chile ha sido ese socio confiable para cientos de compañías extranjeras. Te invitamos a descubrir cómo las empresas extranjeras están reinvirtiendo en nuestro país, generando nuevos negocios y valor para sus compañías y para Chile.
Es el momento de seguir creciendo y avanzando hacia un mejor futuro para todos y todas. Chile necesita consolidar el camino recorrido y proyectarlo hacia los desafíos que los nuevos tiempos exigen. Llegó la hora de ser un país más conectado, líder en energía verde y donde se desarrolle la innovación para la minería del futuro. Pero no podemos avanzar en esa ruta solos. Nuestro país ofrece oportunidades que requieren los socios correctos, que nos ayuden a llegar más rápido donde queremos ir y compartan nuestra visión. Te invitamos a descubrir nuestra cartera pública de oportunidades, la oportunidad de hacer nuevos negocios, con Chile como tu mejor socio. Construyamos el futuro, juntos.
Hoy, hablar de inversión extranjera no es solo hablar de negocios. Es hablar de innovación que potencie nuestro talento, de generar energías más limpias y los combustibles del futuro, de mejores empleos para todos y todas. Es hablar de electromovilidad que mueva nuestras ciudades, de tecnología para hacer volar nuestra imaginación. Es hablar de empujar una nueva mirada, más sostenible, más innovadora e inclusiva. Te invitamos a descubrir cómo las empresas extranjeras están creando, desde Chile, soluciones inteligentes para los desafíos globales. Inversión extranjera con propósito, que marca una diferencia.
Hoy, hablar de inversión extranjera no es solo hablar de negocios. Es hablar de innovación que potencie nuestro talento. Es hablar de generar energías más limpias, de mejores empleos para todos y todas. Es hablar de investigación para descubrir nuevas oportunidades, de capacitación para seguir aprendiendo a crecer. Es hablar de enfrentar juntos los problemas, de empujar una nueva mirada más sostenible, más innovadora e inclusiva. Te invitamos a descubrir cómo las empresas extranjeras están creando desde Chile avances y soluciones para los desafíos globales. Inversión extranjera con propósito, que marca una diferencia.
Invertir es mirar a largo plazo. Es buscar un socio ideal para crecer y desarrollarte de forma segura. Un lugar donde vivir y crear nuevos lazos. Es sumarse a una comunidad que sume su talento para hacer florecer tus ideas. Y para hacer que tus proyectos alcancen su máximo potencial y se transformen en nuevas ideas. Por décadas, Chile ha sido ese socio confiable para cientos de compañías extranjeras. Te invitamos a descubrir cómo las empresas extranjeras están reinvirtiendo en nuestro país, generando nuevos negocios y valor para sus compañías y para Chile.
Es el momento de seguir creciendo y avanzando hacia un mejor futuro para todos y todas. Chile necesita consolidar el camino recorrido y proyectarlo hacia los desafíos que los nuevos tiempos exigen. Llegó la hora de ser un país más conectado, líder en energía verde y donde se desarrolle la innovación para la minería del futuro. Pero no podemos avanzar en esa ruta solos. Nuestro país ofrece oportunidades que requieren los socios correctos, que nos ayuden a llegar más rápido donde queremos ir y compartan nuestra visión. Te invitamos a descubrir nuestra cartera pública de oportunidades, la oportunidad de hacer nuevos negocios, con Chile como tu mejor socio. Construyamos el futuro juntos.
Hoy, hablar de inversión extranjera no es solo hablar de negocios. Es hablar de innovación que potencie nuestro talento, de generar energías más limpias y los combustibles del futuro, de mejores empleos para todos y todas. Es hablar de electromovilidad que mueva nuestras ciudades, de tecnología para hacer volar nuestra imaginación. Es hablar de empujar una nueva mirada, más sostenible, más innovadora e inclusiva. Te invitamos a descubrir cómo las empresas extranjeras están creando, desde Chile, soluciones inteligentes para los desafíos globales. Inversión extranjera con propósito, que marca una diferencia.
Hoy, hablar de inversión extranjera no es solo hablar de negocios. Es hablar de innovación que potencie nuestro talento. Es hablar de generar energías más limpias, de mejores empleos para todos y todas. Es hablar de investigación para descubrir nuevas oportunidades, de capacitación para seguir aprendiendo a crecer. Es hablar de enfrentar juntos los problemas, de empujar una nueva mirada más sostenible, más innovadora e inclusiva. Te invitamos a descubrir cómo las empresas extranjeras están creando desde Chile avances y soluciones para los desafíos globales. Inversión extranjera con propósito, que marca una diferencia.
Invertir es mirar a largo plazo. Es buscar un socio ideal para crecer y desarrollarte de forma segura. Un lugar donde vivir y crear nuevos lazos. Es sumarse a una comunidad que sume su talento para hacer florecer tus ideas. Y para hacer que tus proyectos alcancen su máximo potencial y se transformen en nuevas ideas. Por décadas, Chile ha sido ese socio confiable para cientos de compañías extranjeras. Te invitamos a descubrir cómo las empresas extranjeras están reinvirtiendo en nuestro país, generando nuevos negocios y valor para sus compañías y para Chile.
Es el momento de seguir creciendo y avanzando hacia un mejor futuro para todos y todas.
Hola.
Chile necesita consolidar el camino recorrido.
¿Cómo están? Vamos a partir unos minutos. Ojalá se pueda escuchar esto a quienes están disfrutando del café.
Llegó la hora de ser un país más conectado,
dar paso a nuestro segundo
líder
panel.
en energía verde,
Así que
y donde se
ojalá
desarrolle la
podamos
innovación
irnos
para la minería
instalando,
del
revisar
futuro.
nuevamente los
Pero
celulares
no
porque ya
podemos
vamos a
avanzar en
comenzar.
esa ruta solos. Nuestro país ofrece oportunidades que requieren los socios correctos, que nos ayuden a llegar más rápido donde queremos ir y compartan nuestra visión. Te invitamos a descubrir nuestra cartera pública de oportunidades, la oportunidad de hacer nuevos negocios, con Chile como tu mejor socio. Construyamos el futuro, juntos.
Hoy, hablar de inversión extranjera no es solo hablar de negocios. Es hablar de innovación que potencie nuestro talento, de generar energías más limpias y los combustibles del futuro, de mejores empleos para todos y todas. Es hablar de electromovilidad que mueva nuestras ciudades, de tecnología para hacer volar nuestra imaginación. Es hablar de empujar una nueva mirada, más sostenible, más innovadora e inclusiva. Te invitamos a descubrir cómo las empresas extranjeras están creando, desde Chile, soluciones inteligentes para los desafíos globales. Inversión extranjera con propósito que marca una diferencia.
Hoy, hablar de inversión extranjera no es solo hablar de negocios. Es hablar de innovación que potencie nuestro talento. Es hablar de generar energías más limpias, de mejores empleos para todos y todas. Es hablar de investigación para descubrir nuevas oportunidades, de capacitación para seguir aprendiendo a crecer. Es hablar de enfrentar juntos los problemas, de empujar una nueva mirada más sostenible, más innovadora e inclusiva. Te invitamos a descubrir cómo las empresas extranjeras están creando desde Chile avances y soluciones para los desafíos globales. Inversión extranjera con propósito, que marca una diferencia.
Invertir es mirar a largo plazo. Es buscar un socio ideal para crecer y desarrollarte de forma segura. Un lugar donde vivir y crear nuevos lazos. Es sumarse a una comunidad que sume su talento para hacer florecer tus ideas. Y para hacer que tus proyectos alcancen su máximo potencial y se transformen en nuevas ideas. Por décadas, Chile ha sido ese socio confiable para cientos de compañías extranjeras. Te invitamos a descubrir cómo las empresas extranjeras están reinvirtiendo en nuestro país, generando nuevos negocios y valor para sus compañías y para Chile.
Es el momento de seguir creciendo y avanzando hacia un mejor futuro para todos y todas. Chile necesita consolidar el camino recorrido y proyectarlo hacia los desafíos que los nuevos tiempos exigen. Llegó la hora de ser un país más conectado, líder en energía verde y donde se desarrolle la innovación para la minería del futuro. Pero no podemos avanzar en esa ruta solos. Nuestro país ofrece oportunidades que requieren los socios correctos, que nos ayuden a llegar más rápido donde queremos ir y compartan nuestra visión.
Vuelvo a recordarles que vamos a partir en minutos, así que por favor, si pueden instalarse,
la oportunidad de hacer nuevos negocios,
su ubicación, el asiento, revisar celulares. Sé que hay muchos temas que compartir, que seguir reflexionando, pero en razón del tiempo ya estamos a minutos de partir, sobre todo las personas que están afuera, que puedan ingresar al salón para seguir con este seminario.
Hoy, hablar de inversión extranjera no es solo hablar de negocios. Es hablar de innovación que potencia nuestro talento, de generar energías más limpias y los combustibles del futuro, de mejores empleos para todos y todas. Es hablar de electromovilidad que mueva nuestras ciudades, de tecnología para hacer volar nuestra imaginación. Es hablar de empujar una nueva mirada, más sostenible, más innovadora e inclusiva. Te invitamos a descubrir cómo las empresas extranjeras están creando, desde Chile, soluciones inteligentes para los desafíos globales. Inversión extranjera con propósito que marca una diferencia.
Para que podamos pronto comenzar, que ojalá puedan ubicarse a sus asientos.
Hoy, hablar de inversión extranjera no es solo hablar de negocios. Es hablar de innovación que potencie nuestro talento. Es hablar de generar energías más limpias, de mejores empleos para todos y todas. Es hablar de investigación para descubrir nuevas oportunidades, de capacitación para seguir aprendiendo a crecer. Es hablar de enfrentar juntos los problemas, de empujar una nueva mirada más sostenible, más innovadora e inclusiva. Te invitamos a descubrir cómo las empresas extranjeras están creando desde Chile avances y soluciones para los desafíos globales. Inversión extranjera con propósito, que marca una diferencia.
Invertir es mirar.
How are you all doing? Welcome back. We are hearing a lot of conversation going on. That's great. It means that there's a lot to keep going and doing, and based on the concepts of the panels that we've listened, reflecting on the position of our country regarding investment, how to continue working and thinking about this subject. I would like to share with you that we were going to put focus on foreign investment and the perspective of these global challenges, but focusing on financing, global consultants, investments, and tendencies, risks, opportunity that are defining these issues for the coming years, especially in the geopolitical context. So we're going to welcome Sebastián once more, who is going to moderate this very necessary conversation. Sebastián, thank you very much for this introduction. The issue that we're going to talk about in this panel is very relevant. I believe that the conversation unavoidably is going to be connected with what we spoke about in the first panel. It's going to be very interesting to deepen in this matter from the perspective of financing, the international tendencies for investment and foreign investment, and to project certain scenarios regarding the outlook our panelists have. When you speak about foreign investment and the tendencies, we'll have to highlight the perspectives that investment funds, consulting firms, banks have regarding this issue. There's a lever in this sense that makes projects viable or not, and it's critical when it comes to evaluate what Chile is offering as a space and for an investment platform. It's not just financing the main initiatives and projects that are developed in the country, but also they have a very detailed outlook, and they're following this economic scenarios. I'd like to introduce our panelists of this second block. We're going to talk about this perspective for 2026 with Macarena Navarrete, the EY country manager. Thank you, Sebastián, for this We also have Gianmarco Argomas, the country manager from the World Bank. Oldman Alers, the Latin American director from Manoa Partners. Welcome. Thank you for inviting me. And Jose Mestre, partner in Latin American investment for Padre Investment and Infrastructure. Thank you very much for this invitation. Good to be here. Thank you all for being here. I hope we have a very fluid conversation with different perspectives. Just like in the first panel, we have different visions on the different trajectory of how we're going to build a common view on these subjects. Let's start with a wider view. Macarena, I would like to start with you in this global scenario. a global scenario with more geopolitical fragmentation, uncertainty, a financial component as well, interest rates that were high for a while regarding these inflation cycles. How are you looking the foreign investment perspectives towards Latin America in the short and midterm? Not so extraordinarily, if you will. I'm sorry not to be so positive. Not so great, because this is a competition. Foreign direct foreign investment can go to different destinations, and undoubtedly we're hoping that these go to emerging markets. Nevertheless, Latin America and the Caribbean have some aspects that don't necessarily make them the most attractive markets in this period. Labor market, external demand that's still depressed. Many countries of the region still need to do fiscal adjustments, a lot of political and economical uncertainty. Let's think on these discussions on the geopolitical discussion between China, United States, and Russia, and where they want to make us the backyard of some great power. So we're starting to ask ourselves, is this going to be easier or harder to have investments of countries within the continent and Chile? In that same sense, if it makes it difficult to have global exchange, export mechanisms may not be so positive. We have to also think that the effect of the tariffs in global commerce, we haven't seen them yet in their entire magnitude. These Latin American countries tend to have a lower productivity. We have institutional weakness, safety issues. Infrastructure and education issues are still present. So I would say that direct foreign investment is going to be concentrated in emerging countries, but not Latin America as a first destination. Jean-Marc, what's your vision on these short and mid-term perspectives? Well, first off, thank you very much, English Chile, for inviting me and to have this opportunity to be here. It's true that foreign investment is going to be more selective than what we've seen in the past, given the volatility that we have. But we see very good resilience in this investment. So the region in Latin America, we still see it as with good opportunities. We see a lot of investment from our viewpoint. I'd like to start saying that based on foreign companies in the region will continue investing and increasing their capabilities, reinvest what they've made in the region. And that means that nowadays in the region there are returns adjusted by risk that are still attractive. That's why we see that. We also see the region as very attractive because it has a lot of natural strategic resources, especially on the energy transition. Obviously, copper, lithium, but we also see that in terms of digital infrastructure that's growing. Other energy sources like green hydrogen, all these sources are critical. We see a very good opportunity and lots of interest in that line. The third point, the geopolitical issues. We have partners that see the region very favorably for diversifying their supply chain, the value chain. We also see great opportunities for investment. And I think at the end what's going to be important, and we've heard this all through the morning, is the uncertainty. How to manage risks, how to address uncertainty. And that's where we're going to speak about multilateral banks that I believe have a very important role. We have products of insurance to lower this risk, and our role is to ensure that we work with investors to lower the risk so they can invest and create jobs and generate income for them. Thank you, Jean-Marc. Othman, going with you. So, what's coming for 2026? The question, this is a global competition. Capital goes to where they get the best price per risk. So thinking and competitive stakeholders, like for example Poland, somebody was saying Poland has a tremendous human capital where the dollars in Europe and defense don't stay in tax, they go to Russia. So it's not what's happening within Latin America, but it's something global. And institutions in that context, so what institutions are looking for is institutionalities, to have good rules of the game, just like Gloria Hutt was saying. And there's also an issue of scale and scalability. So in that context, looking at the region, as you mentioned this, Mexico has certain competitive advantages that are not necessarily strong in the institutional side. Mexico has a big market, has infrastructure. United States and Mexico are so interconnected, and there's such a deep relationship. I don't want to say impossible, but it's very difficult to actually disarm. Mexico has a very good strategic. From an institutional perspective, we have a very considerable. We've operated in Argentina and Peru, we're going to Colombia, and we have an exemplary institutional base. We probably need to remember and value, because it's really exemplary, the capacity to make business. Very simple things like to start, have a checking account. I mean, that's relevant, and we have to be very clear in identifying those tremendous values that we have. And that we have to take it to global investment. Looking at what's happened in the last 4 years, that is very important. Jose, I would like to share a more optimistic view. I have very relevant challenges. If we look at the shocks of the last few years, we have the Trump shock, tariffs, institutional pressure on institutions. In practice, if we look at the foundations of economy, and that was in this morning's graph from William, it's been stable. It's true, Latin America hasn't grown, but it's pretty stable. We haven't seen much impact. And why? For many reasons. First, because economies have diversified over time. We don't depend as much on the United States. If we look at commercial exchanges with China, our main client in all countries, has been much more stable. The prices of commodities is maintained. In terms of Chile, copper is at a high price. That's favorable. So when we look at economy, we don't see a major impact. In terms of financing, if indeed rates are higher, but they're not as high as they could be. Spreads are very low. On Monday, I got a report that said that debt emission in January for Latin America was the second largest in history. Colombia emitted 5,050 billion, a little under 6% in the long term. And that's mostly what Colombia has done before, so we probably had the largest emission of debt. So this shows that the conditions could be variable, but they're not bad. We are in deflation processes, and this is moved by raw materials. what we see in Patria, we just developed some funds for the Fund 5 for infrastructure, for investing in productive areas, electrical, energy, logistics, transportation, water, digital data centers, long-term investments. We received $2.9 billion, and this is the largest we've done. So not that just what I'm looking at, it's also our investors, and we're looking at different opportunities. So sometimes we have to see the cup half full rather than the half empty, and we have midterm investments that are very good. Are there anything specific? Of course, in Chile we have water in the central area in Chile. To think about renewable energies on the previous panel, but also in terms of electrification, energy transition, batteries, digital data centers. There's a boom here with major investments in Brazil. It's not the first time. We did a previous phase for investing on the cloud. Now it's for AI, which calls for larger sizes. So we see a lot of opportunities in different subsectors that I've mentioned: energy, transportation, ports, roads, digital, and there are a lot of opportunities. Interesting. Jean-Marc, let's think about the attractiveness that the region can win or lose, in Chile in particular, related to other emerging economies. What are the factors that are important in this backdrop with the geopolitical changes? Well, I think, I like to be a bit more positive and optimistic. So that's going to be my viewpoint today. Not just because I work in the region, but that's how I personally believe. At a more volatile world, I believe in the region, in Latin America, it's very well located. It's going to win in this more volatile world. Why do I say that? Because the first reason is that many countries here have a lot of experience with shocks, external shocks, macroeconomic shocks, and shocks of different kinds. With this experience, they've been able to strengthen. And also, I believe that there are some very good institutions in the regions and the countries, very strong macro situations that in general are strong in comparison to other regions, as we see. And also impact of tariffs. There are impacts, but they're not as strong as we've seen in other countries. There is natural resources that I spoke about earlier, the many strategic minerals that are needed in the world for these decarbonization, a lot of demand. So I believe that the region is in a very good position, but, and this is very important, things change very fast, and we've noticed this in history. And I think William's presentation this morning showed that, yes, that what he showed is what happened in a century, but I believe things can change faster than that. So it's very important that the countries in the region make the reforms that are needed so that investments take place. Because at the end, it's a competition. We're in a very competitive world. There's a limit of capital. Capital goes where returns adjusted by risk are most favorable. So we have to work on that with the public sector so that the state sends the most important messages to investors. I believe that creates the most favorable surroundings. And that's very important for the region to remain in the positive place where it is. Macarena, well, based on what I was listening to, there are some interesting things I would like to share in Latin America. and the Caribbean are in the same time zone that United States, which is a very demanding country. And this has been with like nearshoring, and this has impacted Mexico. But now there is a new kind of nearshoring that's not so near, which is technology, and we produce in the same time zone that United States consumes technology. So for us, regarding outsourcing in terms of technology, that's been extremely important. I believe that's something that I did not mention, and I think it's important to bring forth. It also has to do something with American tariffs. Something else is that Latin America and the Caribbean have a lower impact, excluding Brazil. Of course, Brazil has their own particular situation, but they have specific tariffs of personal hate, if you will. But taking them out of it, that's name and last name with those hates. But regarding the rest, Latin America has a relative low impact in terms of tariffs in comparison with the rest of the world. We estimate that the effect of the tariffs regarding stocks, margin, that we are able to, we don't see those impacts yet, the full impact. But regarding Chile, there's something very curious here. But in terms of Chile, the objective elements are not so different. But optimism in companies is in the heavens, in the cloud. So we expect that Chile next year, I'm actually talking this year, 2026, we're not expecting Chile to grow that much as 2025. That's what the central bank says, that's what multilateral organisms say, or not that much more. Nevertheless, our surveys of perception, what executives say, their companies will grow, the first and the last line, more. They will invest in the growth of their companies, and they're expecting returns on that. And the country's growth is the addition of all the growth of all the actors. So it seems that individual optimism says something different than the central bank and multilateral institutions analysis, and also how optimism is something that's relevant in economics. I think that's still something that still has to be seen. Added to that, investment in Chile in 2025 was better than 2024. From January to October of 2025, we did all that was done in 2024. So we're above the average since 2003. And there are things that the government, the new incoming government, could do if the politics and allows them, is that could actually help. If we think in direct foreign investment, the major component is reinvestment of profits. And that's secondary to regulation for taxing legislation. So it seems that certain measures like economical benefit, co-investment of the state, and many others that could be done, they could actually increase investment in a very important role.
And our main investors are Canada and the US for now. And that does not seem like it's going to change as geopolitics continues being the way it is. But in mining, we have great opportunities in copper, lithium, sustainable energy. So while it doesn't seem like it's better than the region, there's big optimisms, and there are areas where we could do things. And of course, we see communications, advanced communication, renewable energy, and when it comes to technology, we can do a lot, and we are doing a lot in data center. And there's still a lot that we could do. And of course, a copper price that is going up, and that could help Chile and the region with, price of copper going up and up, and and that business local push, which could mean there's more international enthusiasm if we were to do things right. Well, I will not take over more time, but there's a list of several things that the government should do, and it will really depend on how things happen. Thank you, Magarena. And now, Oldman, when it comes to the question on whether there's more changes or whether it's more attractive for investors, well, living apart, sovereignty, which I think is something that does not belong in the panel. The main consumer of the world turning their attention to you should generally be positive, and it could help you organize things. If you dance at the rhythm and there's not too many rules, then you should have a benefit. But I'll go back to, the case of Mexico. There's no two Mexicos, right? And, the distance between New York and LA, and, the distance Matamoros and the port in the south of Tijuana, that cannot be compared. The geographic situation in Mexico, it's difficult to quantify their potential. It's like the potential that we have when it comes to copper. So it's difficult to quantify how wonderful it is. But then we go back to institutionality. And when we talk to an investor, they try to know exactly what are the factors that will have an incidence. And there are factors that are difficult to quantify because you don't know them. For example, corruption and crime in Mexico. And so in the case of Chile, and we all talk specifically about the real estate market, or usually we have exemplary institutionality, but contributions are truly something that has broken our thesis. And, I'm not going to talk about the political issues, in the last few years, but contributions is monstrous uncertainty, and it's a bleeding that has not been stopped, and it's still there. It's completely arbitrary and cannot be compared to methods. And, when you have risks and mitigations, there's a risk for contributions. And, in any type of report, that usually does not sit well with people. And so, of course, we're not going to go over all types of assets in Chile, but I think that we need to know what are those deal breakers, which for investors are difficult to identify. But if you don't have a clear number for the investment committee, that is going to be complicated. So if someone is competing with you, and you kind of know, they're going to win. And so there is a task of identifying what are the assumptions and what are the things that are not yet clear. So solving them from a public policy standpoint, yes. Thank you, Aldwin. Jose? Yes, when I look at the region versus other areas in the world, the political stability or the political risk is less. And so if we think, there's a case of Venezuela, but maybe if there's a transition, that could be reasonable, but that is the only focus for conflict. But if you look at European emerging, you have wars, Ukraine, you have a conflict in Palestine, in Israel, and so we have different risks, and of course the latent risk of China invading Taiwan. So when you think about investment in the short and the mid and long term, there's a region that's steady, with the nearshoring, of course, and being able to work in the time zone and the American time zone, which is something important as well. And the raw material, particularly in Chile, in the case of copper, lithium, these are important needs, but this is for the long term. We have electrification, and copper is really important for defense, and it will continue growing. And so there's also something quite relevant here. And a third element is maybe the history factor of, less investment and more opportunity. And when you have that could be used to be able to invest with real opportunities to support industries that are intensive in capital, such as mining, which need a lot of infrastructure, such as water. And so I think that conditions are quite interesting. And also the rotation of portfolio assets. So investors, they have an overexposition in the US and they see volatility. And we see how investors, we don't like that, risk. And, that's very unpredictable. That's very unpredictable, and it makes the U.S. less attractive in comparison to the rest, or, being exceptional with the U.S. That's, it's less relevant, and that could create a portfolio rotation with an important impact. And also, what's good is the assets have had a good return investment, and we look at bonds and we see how in the region things have been quite attractive, and that generates a sense of optimism. Going back to the future, going back to the past does not mean that you will have a return in the future. So that's another positive thing that would favor us, and just small movements in such big portfolios in something that's relatively less, which is for us that could have a big impact. So there are fundamental aspects here, and I think that makes a thing quite interesting. And that political optimism, and usually investors, they like governments that are pro-market, pro-capitalism, right-wing, and that's what we're seeing. We saw that in Argentina. We are seeing it in Chile now, Bolivia, Peru. We'll see what will happen in Colombia. It seems like it could happen again, Brazil as well. And so a focus towards governments that have a focus in structural reforms and better pro-growth agendas, and more focus on that, I think that could help. And having that focus, I think that means this is quite historical for us, and we need to work in a multipolar world. And we have the US relatively happy, but at the same time we need to be able to continue selling products to China, which is our main commercial partner. And so we need to work properly, and if done right, that could be a source of midterm growth. Okay, now we'll have a round of questions, more specific questions for each of you, to look at different perspectives. And Jean-Marc, how would you qualify, public policies and increasing investment in our country, such as the bill for sectorial permit, and where are the next efforts, from the governments are now starting? Well, we have really considered that. Of course, changes in the bill for those permits, that's a very good progress, because that prevents uncertainty. There's it takes less time, and that's good for investors. So if I have to put an investment for the next 10 years, I don't want to wait 10 years until that investment starts making me money. And so it's important to do that. And it's important to look at the assessment of the environmental impact. And there's a lot of work to do to shorten those times. But just to respond to your question, where we need to direct efforts for the next government, I think, well, first, there's growth and creating quality employment and improving social services, social inclusion, financial inclusion, and all of that with a sustainability approach. So I think that those are the most important points. And how to do that? Well, there are three axes that are really important. First, we need to develop physical infrastructure, social infrastructure, and ports, of course, can. We need to have more ports, and I think that it's quite high, and it's important for competitiveness in the region. And in social infrastructure, there's the waiting lists, which are very long. So that's important, because if I have a small company, I have 10 employees, and for 2 days it takes too long. It's just a small type of tension, so that takes too long. So having the right system is important. Then there's a critical thing for the government, which is improving competence in different areas. There's still a lack of competence in some areas, lots of concentration, and that means innovation. That's my third point. But before that, regulation, more efficient regulation, looking at permits, and the third thing, which is really important, which is innovation. And that's where, my colleague was talking about it. There was an issue with adapting innovation, and so I think the government needs to in place a system and to support companies need to support innovation, because if there's competence, of course many will survive, but many others will die. So we need to work with companies from outside. So it's important to accompany and to develop a system. And from our standpoint, we can work in the private sector, public sector, and in those three areas, in social infrastructure and physical infrastructure, regulation, and also mobilizing capital from outside. That's important, and we're there to support, to create quality employment and to improve the quality of life of Chileans. Thank you, John Mark. Macarena, what are the sectors that you feel have more of a potential for attracting direct foreign investment in Latin America and in Chile? What would be the sectors that you think have a better perspective? Technological infrastructure, green hydrogen. Yes, I was talking about that because we have the receptors of the biggest investments, which is the U.S., Canada, but we still have lots of opportunities in copper, lithium, and sustainable mining, which is mining of the future, and financial services, where we are quite strong there. We still have more room to receive investment, and maybe something, an area where we could develop a bit more, which is we're not that powerful there. We're not as powerful there yet, in renewable energies, and unconventional renewable energies, advanced telecommunications, and the importance of technology. And that's where I was saying, the nearshoring, which is not as near in the U.S., could be quite interesting. And we want to continue building data centers, and that could be really important. And, what Altman said, there's a point where all of these aspects are subject to dropping those uncertainties in the assessment in Chile, and something that's uncertain, and following what Jean-Marc mentioned, is everything related to permits. There's been an improvement, but it could continue improving, and it improved when it comes to sectoral permits, but with environmental permits there's a long way to go, and those are one of the measurements that would make all of these sectors where you could invest in Chile. That would make them much more attractive. And of course, an investment that's that comes from the government in innovation. It's going to be necessary if we want to get to the next stage. Yes, what's really important is, financial services, because that was not in the discussion, and we see that it's an area where there's still potential for growth. Yes, in that area, I think there's lots of room for growth. We see it's an active area, and it's an area that's being developed with high technology services, and it's an area that's including AI and cutting edge technology, so it's very pioneer. Yes, and there's a fintech bill which will generate a push. Yes, and the financial industry, we thought it could be more conservative, less of a pioneer, being the end, and it's not the case. Our stakeholders that are very traditional, evolving in these areas. Yes. Thank you. Altman, in the last few years, Chile has also been part of the radars of real estate investors, foreign investors. So do you think this could be a trend that's increasing, and what could Chile do to strengthen this sector? Yes, it's on the radar. In Chile, we're investing since 2015 with capital from Asian and European institutions. And why Chile, the genesis, and we see how deep the local market is, and the amount of savings in this country is something that's wonderful, because it's not only profit but or liquid capital, but we see that this is a point where those savings were touched on, especially with the funds that people were able to withdraw, and of course that's something that people were kind of afraid of, but that's strong for Chile. The amount of savings we have in comparison to our GDP. In this case, it's 2/3 only in pension funds, and so if we compare that to any benchmark, is huge. That's an area where we are really good at, and that affects community in debt for good, and so that's really valuable, and that is reinforced by the pension system. It's something we'll see in the long term, because basically international stakeholder, when they invest here, they say, well, if at some point I want to sell, do I need to wait for another international investor to be interested in this, or if there's or whether there's a local market that can absorb this, and that has a huge weight. And UF, we have changes. We have some changes, and any investment that is not in dollars. In Mexico, there's several dollars. Brazil, it's a question mark. But magically we have UF, which is a type of currency, and UF and dollar, that's quite flat. So that's great. You have a natural hedge, and you don't have to pay for someone to do that for you. That's quite expensive. So now, keeping all of that into account, which things that is most really positive, I would say that the flip side is the certainty in terms of permit, and that's something that we need to tune, and the amount of money that we have is hard to quantify beyond the hidden tax of time, delays. How can we bring capital due to that reason? And second, and this is like the other extreme, the immediate and the long term, which is something I was really surprised with during the conversation. When it comes to presidential campaigns, the demography in Chile. Yes. I don't think we're actually understanding the demographic issue that we're in right now. Our birth rate in 2025 was 1.13. So that's less than Japan, less than Spain and Italy. And Europe has public policies to improve the demographic condition. They have been doing it for 15 years. So we are even worse than the average in Europe. And I don't see anything good happening in the future. So there's no incentives for family for having children. There's no incentives for procreation. So usually we need people, right? Particularly because our economical base is not sophisticated services. We need labor. And so the demographic issue I think is something that needs to be a long-term priority number one for public policies. It's an urgent matter, yes. And it was not present in the presidential discussion. It was not a priority. Yes, I'm sorry. To bring European capital to Chile or Latin America. For 10 years, we were always talking about, Latin America. We have kids. There's a, growing trend. And then all of a sudden, that was out of the picture. And not only that, but we are below Europe, in case of Chile. So I don't know how much I can say this, 1.13, that's so little. Thank you, Altman. Jose, from your standpoint, what's key so that Chile can strengthen this position in being a reliable destination, and especially in the long term for investment? Well, that's a good way of setting the framework, because I think that we have discussed that. We have been investing for many years, and there's a risk of the constituents, and I think there's things that are not in the debate and others are in the debate. And I would say that there's nothing new, because it's all part of the debate, but there's a thing that we have been discussing here, but there's two things. The taxes and permits, when it comes to taxes, I think that it's relevant in two aspects. First, stability. I think there's been a lot of noise, but sometimes more noise about changes. And even Pilar mentioned this, investment vehicles, foreign investors, for us investors, that's really scary. So stability, visibility, seeing that there'll be no changes. And, the SL600 warranting the long-term import rate. And that was, considered for the country. So some stability would be important. And being objective, the corporate rate is quite high versus the city. So I think that considering product reduction would be a very good sign for investors.
Number two would be in terms of permits. That is something that's really present. We've mentioned it many times. There are different manuals, and there's a positive consensus that the outgoing government that made reforms as well as the incoming government that wants to do that. Yesterday the CPC presented a very long document, and it's evident that it takes a long time for projects to get the permits. The same goes with tenders. It takes for a long time. We had a water project we started in 2015, and hopefully this year we'll finally get the permits. It's more than 10 years. It's too much. It's a long time, It's a long time to get the environmental licensing. Once you think you're done, then permits come, because permits, which is something I would like to mention, that many permits are sequential. Many are repetitive. Many of them have very indefinite timings that have to be shortened, and also perhaps create positive administrative silence, if after a certain time, goes by, and then you assume it's approved. So we have to make things easier, reduce complexity, and allow the funnel to move, and have these projects, that we lose internal momentum. There are changes in many places. So we have these three. Hopefully that the incoming government can do this and fast. So we're gonna address this. As Olman and Jose were saying, in terms of taxes. When you mentioned this, Macarena, the issue of taxing, what's the weight in the discussion? Gigantically important. We've been spending too much time talking about our taxing system, and that makes the eternal waiting of projects. We need faster to reduce the rate of taxes to companies, which is very high. We need different political groups to accept that that is not fast to do without any realistic compensations. We have to understand who contributes to this compensation. We have to understand that it's not always the other doing this compensation. We all have to cooperate. We're going to broaden the tax-paying base. We're going to have to create a reasonable mechanism for another group to... There has to be a minimum presumptive income, and so we don't have to affect those who are... And we also have to recover the political system, because part of the problem that we have and the way that we have issues with taxes, because we have a political system that generates instability. We have to repair our political system to have more stability in legislation, where we're able to be convinced that this is reasonable and it's going to last forever. Taking into account what you were mentioning here, the fact that we abandoned foreign investment contracts, that is a mistake. We have to take that up again, or something similar, because we haven't been at the same level of the circumstances in order to give legislative stability. So now we're going to develop our own merit for those who want to come and to invest, along with going with the idea we have to work in terms of infrastructure, not just ports, but also roads, energy routes. We saw what happened with the big blackout last year. Digital networks, more ample digital networks. We have to work around whatever facilitates operations and logistics, and give clear impulses to productive sectors in which, as a country, we know we can shine. And saying to Olmen, the danger, the demographic danger of what happens in the country is really high, and we don't realize that we're actually planting a bomb for future issues. We have to really have cultural changes and stimulus to families. We have to stimulate families, which is not easy. But why? Because since it's not easy, we have to start soon. We need to have real economic benefits to families, and work in cultural shifts that we revert this demographic issue, and we reach a point where the lack of population generates a crisis. Jean-Marc, regarding taxing, how important is this nowadays? How much weight does it have in view of investors? Well, it's very important. And as I said before, the country has to be competitive vis-a-vis other countries. But when we talk about that, we speak about income. We also have to speak about expenditure. Expenditure has to be more efficient. That is very important for the country. There's a lot of discussion in those terms, how to make public expenditure is more efficient. We don't necessarily less, but more efficient, and invest in the important sectors. And there are many investment opportunities and many important things to be done, but I just wanted to mention something that Jose was saying regarding aging. The aging of the population, and we spoke about this as a challenge. But I also see this as an opportunity. And the opportunity is, well, the health system has to develop, generate more investment, more jobs. The same goes with the financial system. We have to support banks and the financial system that develop products that are adapted to this kind of population, because nowadays this population is a population that doesn't have the services and products that are adequate. So there are opportunities there. Of course. We have 10 minutes left for this panel. Like to take advantage of these last minutes to speak about the political aspects of Chile. Do you see this as an asset in front of investors, the fact that we have institutionality and the way politics have responded to this really convulsive system from 2019 to now? We've had a lot of elections, constitutional processes. We all know the history and how challenging and intense it's been, and it seems that cycle has shut. But I would like to hear your vision regarding what Chile saw in that process back then. Is it an asset that we have this institutionality? What do you think, Jose? I do see it as an asset. As I was mentioning before, there was a time of uncertainty with the constitutional processes. I believe that the initial reaction to the social upheaval was going to the left or the right. The different rejections actually took us to a situation in which people concluded that perhaps we're not that bad as we thought we were. And I believe that there's been a maturing process. The institutions have been very important. And I believe that the campaign has been exemplary in that. So we're speaking about extremes, but it was very civilized at the end when the calls of the losing candidate and also the phone calls of Cast with the Boric. Those are very important. People think they might be really look at Brazil when Bolsonaro did not accept his loss. Trump with the same first thing. This revenge system that we used to see in Argentina, we don't see that here, and that's important. I was telling that you before, we as investors, we like stability. Those of us who stayed here, live here, we've seen those who see it from New York, from London, from Beijing, from Hong Kong. To see that is important. Looking at a country where there is a political transition, where we speak about collaboration, that's not a minor. That's called for the institutionality that we look at. Oldman. I have the same opinion. From 2019 onwards, we've seen something really exemplary. In fact, when we were talking to Europe about the situation after the political upheaval in 2019, we tended to reduce anxiety inside as a process for maturing of a country that's still developing, and time actually proved us right. On the political side and on the pandemic side, because we got those two tremendous simultaneous shocks, we have this wave effect on the side with the political pendulum going from one side to the other, but also economically, financially, at a macro level, and also in people's and families' pockets. We're still in the process of stabilization. The waves of the pandemic are still moving. We still have we have many offices in Santiago that are empty. During the pandemic, nobody went back to the office. Everybody's working at home. Offices closed down, and for us that was an opportunity. We went out and bought offices for very specific conditions in Chile, and now we're seeing this to recovering. But the same as the political pendulum, there are still economic issues that we do see them as part of these waves, but in general we don't have to forget the superposition of these two events. When you get two punches on two different sides, unrelated matters, they have some implications. So we hope that the new government to be careful not on just on the political side, but also on the economic side, there was very deep pain of these superposed elements. Macarena, totally in agreement. Institutionality is an asset. We have to understand that the social upheaval were something that will live globally, not just in Chile, but the way Chile overcame that is very Chilean, very institutional, and that characterizes us. Evidently, it's not something stupendous, to go from extreme to extreme in each election, but nevertheless, the country's development is not from extreme to extreme. We're still able to maintain a certain relatively stable path, relatively reasonable. There have been important corruption events in Chile, and I believe that nevertheless, just like Jean-Marc was saying, on how funds are being expended produces worry in certain investors, because they see that they are being charged a lot of taxes, so this corruption to happen. Regardless, I believe this is a good process, but we have to uncover corruption. So I believe that the Chilean political process is good, it's working well. Chile, in that sense, is extremely attractive. When I speak with my colleagues in regional conversations, we have those who have presidents in jail, presidents who don't accept elections. And it's us that 2 hours after an election is ended, the new president, the former president are calling each other on the phone. They bother me. Why don't they answer cell phones? Do you don't have landlines? No, yeah, it's funny, but Chile is something separate from the rest. Thank you, Macarena. Jean-Marc, we will close with you. I'm going to say something very, very short. I completely agree with what my colleagues have said, but I believe that Chilean people here can be very proud of what they have. I have experience in other countries, and we've seen in other countries in other region not always working thus. And something that I was really surprised, I arrived here for a week, but in comparison of what I've seen in other countries, we've seen problems in other sectors. I mean, we've seen this in other countries, and it doesn't happen always. Jean-Marc, Macarena, Olman, Jose, thank you very much for joining us in this conversation, and also looking at the financial sectors. We'll ask you for an applause for everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Bibi, back to you for closing. So with this closing, a very interesting morning with reflections, viewpoints, and with challenges for 2026. Thus, we are closing this seminar, but there are still a few things I would like to remind you that are very important. For example, that you can follow InvestChile on LinkedIn, but these conversations and panels and everything that took place today is going to be saved in the website. We also had the streaming transmission, and you're all invited to continue with these reflections over the year. Thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Es el momento de seguir creciendo y avanzando hacia un mejor futuro para todos y todas. Chile necesita consolidar el camino recorrido y proyectarlo hacia los desafíos que los nuevos tiempos exigen. Llegó la hora de ser un país más conectado, líder en energía verde y donde se desarrolle la innovación para la minería del futuro. Pero no podemos avanzar en esa ruta solos. Nuestro país ofrece oportunidades que requieren los socios correctos.